A little boy says to a billionaire CEO, "Hey sir, my mom told me you abandoned us." The glittering lights of New York City cast long shadows on the snow-covered sidewalk as Edward Malone stepped out of his corporate headquarters on Christmas Eve. At 38, he cut an imposing figure, tall, distinguished, with silver threading through his dark hair and success etched into every line of his tailored suit. The evening air bit sharply through his wool coat, but he barely noticed, his mind still caught in the web of merger documents waiting on his desk. He checked his watch, 7:45 p.m. Another Christmas Eve spent at the office. Another holiday season marked by the quiet hum of his penthouse and the distant sound of other family celebrations. The thought didn't bother him anymore. He'd learned long ago that success demanded sacrifice. "Excuse me, sir," a young voice cut through his thoughts, clear and surprisingly steady. Edward turned, finding himself face to face with a boy of about 11. The child stood straight-backed, despite the oversized coat that hung from his thin frame, his dark eyes reflecting the determination of someone far older. Something about those eyes caught Edward off guard. There was a familiar intensity in them that tugged at long, buried memories. "Are you Mr. Edward Malone?" the boy asked, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Edward nodded, his business mask sliding automatically into place. "I am. And you are?" "My name is Timothy Walker." Timmy, the boy swallowed hard but maintained eye contact. "My mom told me about you. She said you left us." The words hit Edward like a physical blow. He felt the carefully constructed walls of his world shudder, years of suppressed memories threatening to break through. The boy's features suddenly came into sharp focus, the curve of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he tilted his head slightly when speaking. All painfully familiar gestures that belonged to someone Edward had tried very hard to forget. "I think there must be some mistake," Edward managed, his voice surprisingly unsteady. But even as he spoke, he knew exactly who this boy's mother was, and the recognition sent a cold spike of guilt through his chest that had nothing to do with the December air. Timmy shifted his weight, snow crunching beneath his worn boots. "Mom said you were different back then," he continued, each word deliberate and cutting. "Before you chose money over love. Before you abandoned us." Edward's practiced composure cracked. The boy's words weren't accusations, they were delivered with the simple, devastating honesty of a child stating facts he'd grown up hearing. The street sounds faded away, leaving only the soft fall of snow and the hammering of his heart. "I know all about you," Timmy went on, pulling a folded newspaper clipping from his coat pocket. It showed Edward at a charity gala, the headline proclaiming him New York's most eligible bachelor. "Mom keeps this hidden in her drawer. She thinks I don't know, but I've seen her looking at it sometimes, when she thinks I'm asleep." The image of Claire, still holding on to that piece of his life after all these years, struck Edward with unexpected force. He remembered her, of course he remembered her. Claire Walker, with her fierce intelligence and unwavering faith in him, even when he'd been nothing but a struggling MBA student with big dreams and empty pockets. "Your mother," Edward started, then stopped, his voice hoarse. "Claire, how is she?" "She works 3 jobs," Timmy replied, a flash of pride mixing with pain in his eyes. "She's a manager at Joe's Diner now, but she also tutors kids online and does bookkeeping on weekends. She doesn't think I know about the 3rd job, but I do. I know a lot of things adults think kids don't understand." Edward felt each word like a physical blow. The thought of Claire, brilliant, ambitious Claire, working herself to exhaustion while he lived in luxury, made him sick to his stomach. And this boy, this child who should have been protected from adult worries, instead stood before him with the weight of understanding far beyond his years. "Does she know you're here?" Edward asked, already knowing the answer. Timmy shook his head. "She'd be mad if she knew. But I had to meet you. I had to meet you. I had to know if you were really as cold as your pictures make you look." The Christmas lights blurred into streaks of color as Edward's mind spiraled back 13 years. He saw Claire in their favorite coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug, tears streaming down her face as he told her he was leaving. "We'll hold you back," he'd said, convincing himself it was for her own good. "I need to focus on my career." The memory of her expression, devastation warring with dignity, had haunted him far longer than he cared to admit. "You look just like her," Edward found himself saying, his voice barely audible above the growing wind. The boy had Claire's eyes, her determined chin, the same way of standing straight-backed in the face of adversity. The resemblance was like a knife twisting in his gut. The snow began falling harder now, thick flakes catching in Timmy's dark curls. The wind picked up, sending holiday decorations swaying violently on their poles, the cheerful bells creating a discordant symphony against the howling gusts. The storm that had been threatening all day was finally breaking. "You should get home," Edward said, reaching for his professional demeanor like a shield. "It's not safe out here." He glanced down the street, where the diner's neon sign flickered weakly through the thickening snow. The thought of Claire there, working another long shift while her son stood in the cold confronting her past, made his chest tighten painfully. Timmy pulled his coat tighter but didn't move. "Mom says you were scared," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the wind. "She says you ran away because you were afraid of needing people, of letting anyone need you." He paused, snowflakes melting on his eyelashes. "Are you still scared, Mr. Malone?" The question hit harder than any accusation could have. Edward stared at the boy, this child who spoke with such insight, who carried the weight of adult understanding on such young shoulders. Behind Timmy, the city lights grew dimmer as the storm intensified, creating a surreal backdrop to this moment of reckoning. Thunder rumbled overhead, unusually loud for a winter storm. The sound seemed to echo Edward's internal turmoil, the carefully constructed walls of his life cracking under the weight of long-suppressed guilt and regret. The wind whipped around them, carrying with it the faint strains of Christmas carols from a nearby church, the joyful lyrics a stark contrast to the scene unfolding on the snow-covered sidewalk. "I think," Edward started, then stopped as his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I think you should let me walk you back to the diner." He gestured at the worsening weather, at the nearly empty street. "Your mother must be worried." "She worries all the time," Timmy said simply. "About bills, about my school fees, about whether she's doing enough." He looked up at Edward, snowflakes swirling between them. "She never says it, but I know she worries most about me wondering why my father didn't want us." The words hung in the frigid air between them, heavy with 13 years of absence and unspoken pain. Above them, the storm clouds roiled, reflecting the turmoil of this unexpected confrontation. The Christmas decorations that had seemed so festive moments ago now cast strange, shifting shadows across Timmy's young face, highlighting how much of his childhood had been shaped by Edward's choices. A particularly strong gust of wind sent a trash can clattering across the street, the harsh metallic sound breaking the moment. Edward instinctively stepped forward, placing himself between Timmy and the wind. The protective gesture surprised them both, and for a moment they stood frozen in this tableau, the successful businessman and the young boy, connected by choices made long ago, as the storm raged around them on Christmas Eve. Edward Malone learned about loss before he understood success. At 12, his world shattered when a late-night car accident claimed both his parents, leaving him alone in a system that processed tragedy with mechanical efficiency. The St. Michael's Home for Children became his world, a grey stone building on the outskirts of Boston where dreams went to die and hope was a luxury few could afford. Young Edward watched as other children were chosen, adopted into loving families while he grew too old, too guarded for prospective parents to consider. His intelligence became his armor, his ambition his escape route. While other children played in the yard, he buried himself in borrowed textbooks, understanding early that knowledge was the only inheritance he could count on. Mrs. Sullivan, the elderly librarian who volunteered at the home, recognized something in the quiet boy who devoured business magazines and economics texts. "You remind me of my late husband," she told him one day, sliding an advanced mathematics book across the table. He built something from nothing too. Those words became his mantra, a promise he made to himself in the narrow bed of his shared room. By 16, Edward had earned a full scholarship to a prestigious boarding school, his test scores opening doors that circumstance had tried to close. He worked evenings and weekends, saving every penny, watching as classmates spent more on a single weekend than he had seen in a year. The other students learned to avoid the serious boy who never joined their parties, never shared their casual approach to wealth and privilege. College followed Harvard on another scholarship, where he majored in economics and minored in never letting anyone close enough to abandon him again. He worked 3 jobs between classes, his resolve hardening with each privileged sneer, each whispered comment about his second-hand clothes and obvious poverty. Every slight became fuel, every rejection another brick in the wall he built around his heart. His breakthrough came during his MBA program. A investment strategy he developed caught the attention of Marcus Henderson, a visiting lecturer and veteran Wall Street investor. "You have hunger," Henderson had said, studying Edward's proposal. "And hunger is worth more than heritage in this business." That opportunity became Malone Industries. Edward worked 18-hour days, leveraging Henderson's connections and his own ruthless determination. He learned to wear success like a second skin, to make his orphanage background sound like an inspiring story, rather than a wound that never quite healed. By 30, he had bought out Henderson's share. By 35, Malone Industries was a Fortune 500 company. But success came with its own price. Edward's apartment grew larger as his circle of true connections grew smaller. He dated occasionally beautiful, ambitious women who understood the language of success but never asked about his nightmares, never questioned why he kept no family photos in his expansive office. Only Claire had ever breached those walls. Claire, with her waitressing job and her night school classes, who had looked at him and seen past the carefully constructed facade to the scared orphan still hiding beneath. Claire, who he had left because her love felt too much like a trap, too similar to the family he had lost once before. Now, at 38, Edward Malone was everything his 12-year-old self had dreamed of becoming. His penthouse overlooked Central Park, his company employed thousands, and his name regularly appeared in Forbes. He had built an empire from nothing, just as he had promised himself in that orphanage library. Yet on nights like this, with Christmas lights reflecting off his office windows and families hurrying home below, the victory felt hollow. The empire he had built was impressive but empty, every achievement echoing in rooms too large for one person, every success celebrated with people who knew his net worth, but not his fears. And now here was Timmy standing in the snow with Claire's eyes and 13 years of questions, threatening to unravel everything Edward had spent his life building. Not his empire, something far more fragile, the careful fiction that he was better off alone, that leaving Claire had been the right choice, that success could fill the spaces where family should be. Claire Walker's earliest memory was of waiting. She was 8 years old, sitting on the front steps of their small apartment building, her pink backpack clutched tight against her chest as the sun set and her mother never came home. The police found Karen Walker 3 days later in Atlantic City, having traded motherhood for slot machines and a fresh start. They never saw her again. Growing up with her grandmother taught Claire 2 things: love wasn't guaranteed, and survival meant never depending entirely on anyone else. Margaret Walker worked as a school custodian, raising her granddaughter on a combination of fierce pride and careful budgeting. Every month was a mathematics problem they had to solve together, balancing medication costs against grocery needs, utility bills against school supplies. "You're smarter than all of them put together," her grandmother would say, watching Claire study under the flickering kitchen light. "Don't let anyone tell you different." Those words became Claire's foundation, carrying her through high school and into college on a patchwork of scholarships and determination. She met Edward during her senior year while waitressing at the campus coffee shop. He was different from the other business school students who treated service workers like furniture. Edward noticed things: how she annotated economics textbooks during slow shifts, how she could calculate complex orders in her head. He saw her, not just through her. Their love story bloomed in stolen moments between her shifts and his internships. They shared dreams over cooling coffee and day-old muffins, planning futures between customer orders. Edward understood her drive because he shared it. They were both running from poverty, both determined to prove something to the world. When he left, it nearly destroyed her. The pain was familiar, another person choosing to walk away, but the magnitude was different. Edward hadn't just taken himself, he'd taken their shared dreams, their carefully laid plans, their future. The pregnancy, she discovered 2 weeks later, felt like a cruel joke from the universe. The miscarriage that followed was worse. Lying in the sterile hospital room, Claire finally understood why her mother had run. Sometimes the weight of staying, of facing your broken dreams every day, was harder than any judgment that came with leaving. But Claire wasn't her mother. She went back to work 2 days later, threw herself into finishing her degree. When she met James Wilson 6 months after Edward left, she mistook his intensity for passion, his possessiveness for love. By the time she realized her mistake, she was already pregnant with Timmy. James's reaction to the pregnancy revealed his true character. He offered money for the problem to go away, then threatened legal action when she refused. The last time she saw him, he was signing away his parental rights, his lawyer's business card left on the table like a final insult. Now, at 36, Claire managed the same diner where she'd once been a waitress. The owner, Joe, had become a surrogate father figure, giving her flexible hours when Timmy was small and a promotion when she'd earned her business degree through night classes. She handled the books for 3 other local businesses on weekends and tutored high school students online after Timmy went to bed. Her apartment was small but well kept, every surface showing signs of a life carefully organized around her son. Timmy's academic awards hung alongside his art projects, his medical records filed neatly beside school reports. She'd made sure he never felt the instability she'd known as a child, never questioned whether he was loved enough to make someone stay. But sometimes, late at night, Claire would take out the old newspaper clippings showing Edward at various charity events and business functions. She'd trace his features, noting how success had hardened his face, how his smile never quite reached his eyes anymore. In those moments, she didn't see the successful CEO who'd abandoned her. She saw the scared orphan who'd never learned how to trust love could last. When Timmy asked about his father, she told him edited versions of the truth. She spoke about Edward's determination, his intelligence, his drive to succeed. She never mentioned James Wilson. Let her son believe he came from love, even if that love hadn't been strong enough to endure. Timmy Walker was born on a stormy October night, 3 weeks early, and already showing the determination that would define his life. While other babies in the nursery wailed, Timmy watched the world with quiet intensity, his dark eyes taking in everything around him. The nurses called him the old soul, and even then, Claire knew her son was special. From his earliest years, Timmy displayed an uncanny ability to understand adult situations. At 5, he started saving his allowance in a jar labeled Mom's birthday, though Claire's birthday was months away. He'd overheard her worrying about the rent and decided birthdays could wait. When she found the jar, tucked behind his picture books, Claire cried for the first time since Edward left. School became Timmy's sanctuary. His teachers marveled at his ability to grasp complex concepts, to see connections others missed. By 4th grade, he was reading at a high school level, devouring books about science, history, and business. The last subject fascinated him most, perhaps because he'd secretly started studying Edward Malone's career, piecing together the puzzle of the man his mother still loved. But brilliance came with its burdens. Timmy learned early to hide his intelligence, to blend in with his classmates. Being too smart made you different, and different meant difficult questions about family circumstances. He became adept at deflecting inquiries about his father, developing a repertoire of vague answers that satisfied curiosity without revealing truth. Despite his efforts to remain unnoticed, Timmy's academic achievements couldn't be hidden. His science project on renewable energy won the state competition, earning him a feature in the local newspaper. Claire framed the article, proud tears in her eyes, but Timmy noticed how she carefully cut off the part mentioning single-parent household. At home, Timmy played a role far beyond his 11 years. He learned to read his mother's expressions, to know when bill-paying days had been particularly tough. He developed a system of accidentally falling asleep on the couch on nights she worked late, so she wouldn't feel guilty about leaving him alone. When she thought he was sleeping, he heard her quiet conversations with Aunt Sarah about medical bills and school fees. His own health issues were a constant undercurrent in their lives. The mysterious fatigue, the occasional fever spikes that sent them to the emergency room. Timmy learned to downplay his symptoms, hating how worry aged his mother's face. He became an expert at hiding his exhaustion, at pushing through school days when his body screamed for rest. But it was the emotional weight that proved heaviest. Timmy watched his mother work multiple jobs, saw how she sacrificed everything for him, and felt the crushing responsibility of being someone's entire world. He noticed how she avoided dating, how she flinched when his friends' parents asked about his father at school functions. The truth about Edward Malone came to him in pieces, a glimpse of an old photo hidden in his mother's drawer. Overheard conversations between his mother and Aunt Sarah. Articles discovered during late-night internet searches when his symptoms kept him awake. Each piece revealed more about the man who had shaped his life through absence. What fascinated Timmy most wasn't Edward's success, though that was impressive, but the parallels he saw between them. The same drive to excel, the same ability to read people, even the same habit of running fingers through their hair when deep in thought. These similarities felt like messages written in invisible ink, revealing themselves slowly over time. Now, standing in the snow facing Edward Malone himself, Timmy felt the weight of all these years of quiet observation and understanding. He saw the successful businessman his mother had loved, the scared orphan who'd run away, and something else, a reflection of his own loneliness mirrored in Edward's eyes. The relationships between Edward, Claire, and Timmy were intricately woven with threads of love, pain, and unspoken truths. At the center stood Joe's Diner, a humble establishment that had witnessed their story's most pivotal moments. It was here, 13 years ago, that Edward had first seen Claire, her textbooks spread across the counter during the quiet morning shift. Here, too, where he'd left her that rainy spring evening, his MBA acceptance letter burning a hole in his pocket. Sarah Martinez, Claire's best friend and fellow waitress, had watched it all unfold. She'd held Claire through the aftermath of Edward's departure, the miscarriage, and later, through James Wilson's betrayal. Sarah became Timmy's godmother, the one constant male presence in his life being her husband Michael, who coached Timmy's little league team and taught him to ride a bike. Dr. Thomas Bennett entered their lives when Timmy was 5, during the first mysterious fever that sent them to the emergency room. The elderly physician saw past Claire's brave facade, understanding the strain of being both mother and father while living paycheck to paycheck. He began scheduling Timmy's appointments at the end of his day, allowing Claire to come after her diner shift, and somehow their bills always seemed lower than expected. James Wilson lurked at the edges of their story like a shadow. His corporate raids had made him infamous in New York's business circles, each hostile takeover adding to his reputation for ruthlessness. What few knew was how he'd crossed paths with Edward years before Timmy's birth, when both were ambitious MBA students competing for the same prestigious internship. Edward's victory had sparked a rivalry that would eventually entangle Claire in its web. The diner's regular customers formed an extended family of sorts. There was Mrs. Henderson, an elderly widow who always requested Claire's section and left generous tips with grandmotherly advice. Mr. Chen from the grocery store next door kept an eye on Timmy after school, letting him do homework in the store's back office until Claire's shift ended. Even Officer Roberts, who patrolled their neighborhood, made a point of checking on them during night shifts. But it was the relationship between Claire and Edward that cast the longest shadow. Their love story had become local legend among the diner's longtime staff, the brilliant waitress and the determined business student who seemed destined for greatness together. Some, like Joe himself, still kept a weathered photo behind the counter. Edward and Claire at the diner's Christmas party, young and in love, their whole futures ahead of them. Timmy had grown up surrounded by these interconnected relationships, absorbing their complexities like a silent observer. He noticed how conversations stopped when he entered rooms, how adults exchanged meaningful glances when certain names were mentioned. He learned to read the subtle shifts in his mother's expression when Edward appeared in the news, the way she still automatically made coffee the way Edward had liked it, strong, with just a splash of cream. The diner's night cook, Robert, was the only one who spoke openly about Edward to Timmy. An army veteran with a philosopher's heart, Robert would share stories during quiet moments when Timmy did homework at the counter. "Your mother's strength," he'd say, wiping down the grill, "that comes from love. Sometimes the people who leave us shape us more than the ones who stay." Now, as their paths converged again on this snowy Christmas Eve, each character carried their own version of the truth. Claire held on to memories of a love that had been real despite its ending. Edward buried himself in success to avoid facing his fears of attachment. And Timmy, wise beyond his years, understood more than any of them realized about the power of choices and their lasting consequences. The manila envelope sat unopened on Edward's desk for 3 days after his encounter with Timmy. His private investigator had delivered it with an unusual warning: "Mr. Malone, some truths are harder than others." Finally, alone in his office on a grey December morning, Edward broke the seal. The first document was a hospital record from 13 years ago. Edward's hands trembled as he read the admission details: patient Claire Walker. Admission March 15th. Reason: attempted suicide by medication overdose. The date struck him like a physical blow exactly 2 weeks after he'd left her at the diner. The attending physician's notes were clinical but devastating: patient discovered by co-worker. Severe depression triggered by recent relationship termination and subsequent miscarriage. The words seemed to pulse on the page. Edward pushed back from his desk, his throat tight. Claire had been pregnant. She had been carrying his child, and he hadn't known. The report continued, detailing how Sarah Martinez had found Claire unconscious in her apartment, an empty bottle of sleeping pills beside her bed, and a tear-stained note that simply read, "I can't do this alone." The next document was a newspaper clipping he'd never seen, tucked away in a small town paper's back pages. Local student overcomes tragedy to graduate. The photo showed Claire at her college graduation 2 years after he'd left. She stood alone in her cap and gown, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. The article mentioned her working 3 jobs to finish her degree, noting her as an inspiration to single mothers everywhere. Financial records painted a picture of constant struggle. Medical bills piled up from Timmy's mysterious health issues. Rent payments consistently late but never missed. Small loans taken out and painfully repaid. Credit cards maxed out for school supplies and winter coats. Through it all, Claire had never once sought legal support or gone public with their story, even as Edward's success made headlines. A more recent bank statement showed the true depth of her current situation. Claire's account balanced on a knife's edge between survival and disaster. Every paycheck was immediately divided between necessities, with nothing left for emergencies. Yet somehow she'd managed to set aside a small college fund for Timmy, contributing $5 here, $10 there, building hope from spare change. The final document was the most painful a letter Claire had written to him but never sent, dated just 6 months after he'd left. The paper was worn, as if it had been unfolded and refolded many times. Dear Edward, today I saw your picture in the business section. You're doing exactly what you always dreamed of, and I should be happy for you. But all I can think about is how you'll never know about the baby we lost, or how the doctor said the stress of your leaving likely triggered the miscarriage. I don't blame you, we were young, and dreams sometimes cost more than we expect to pay. I just wish you'd known that you weren't alone in being scared of needing someone. I was terrified too. The difference is I was more afraid of not having you than of letting you in. I won't send this letter. Your new life doesn't have room for old regrets. Just know that I'll always believe in the man you could have been, the one who was brave enough to love, not just succeed. Claire. Edward set the letter down, his vision blurred. The magnitude of what he'd done, not just leaving, but the cascade of tragedy he'd initiated, settled over him like a physical weight. He'd told himself he was protecting Claire from his ambition, giving her freedom to find someone better. Instead, he'd left her to face the darkest moments of her life alone. The intercom buzzed, his assistant's voice cutting through his thoughts. Mr. Malone? The board is waiting for the quarterly meeting. Cancel it, Edward said, his voice rough. Cancel everything today. He stood at his office window, watching the city below. Somewhere out there, Claire was probably at the diner, serving coffee and hiding her exhaustion behind a professional smile. Timmy was likely at school, carrying the weight of adult worries no child should bear. And here he stood in his tower of success, only now understanding the true cost of his choices. The investigator's report had one final note: subject maintains a small savings account dedicated to T's college contributions, often correspond with missed meals, suggesting personal sacrifice for child's future. The simple observation cut deeper than any accusation could have. Claire found the first evidence in a stack of old hospital bills. She had been organizing paperwork late one night when she noticed something odd: payments marked processed on accounts she knew she hadn't paid. Digging deeper, she discovered a pattern stretching back years. Anonymous donations, administrative adjustments, mysterious insurance coverage she'd never applied for. The truth emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in darkroom chemicals. The scholarship fund that had covered Timmy's school fees when she'd fallen behind. The clerical error that had halved their rent during the months she'd been between jobs. The anonymous donor who contributed to Timmy's medical care whenever the bills threatened to overwhelm them. It was him, wasn't it? Sarah asked one evening, after Claire shared her suspicions. They sat in the empty diner after closing, the remnants of the day's coffee growing cold between them. Edward's been watching out for you all along. Claire nodded, her throat tight. But why? Why help in secret all these years instead of just— she couldn't finish the sentence. Instead of just coming back? Instead of facing us? The revelation about James Wilson came next, and it was far more bitter. A regular customer, a retired legal secretary, recognized his name when he appeared on the news. That man, she said, pointing to the television where James Wilson announced his latest corporate acquisition. He used to work with Edward Malone. Terrible rivalry between them. Wilson swore to destroy everything Malone cared about. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. James hadn't met Claire by chance at that business conference. He'd pursued her deliberately, knowing her connection to Edward. Their brief relationship, his cruel abandonment when she became pregnant, it had all been part of his vendetta against Edward. But the cruelest revelation came on a routine Tuesday morning. Dr. Bennett's face was grave as he delivered the news. The persistent fatigue, the headaches he'd been ignoring, they weren't just symptoms of overwork. The diagnosis felt like a cruel joke: stage 2 breast cancer, the same disease that had taken her grandmother. "We caught it relatively early," Dr. Bennett said gently. "But you'll need to start treatment immediately. Surgery, then chemotherapy. You'll have to take time off work. Claire sat in the sterile examination room, her mind racing. Time off work meant no income. No income meant no rent, no food, no Timmy's medications. The careful balance she'd maintained for years threatened to collapse entirely. There are programs, Dr. Bennett continued, pulling out pamphlets, financial assistance support groups. I can't tell him, Claire interrupted, thinking of Timmy. He worries enough already. He's just a child. He shouldn't have to. Claire, Dr. Bennett's voice was firm. You can't do this alone. Alone. The word echoed in her mind as she drove to work, as she served coffee with steady hands, as she helped Timmy with his homework that evening. She'd been alone for so long, she'd forgotten how to be anything else. That night, after Timmy was asleep, Claire found herself staring at Edward's business card, the one he'd left after their Christmas Eve encounter. His private number was written on the back in his familiar, precise handwriting. Her finger hovered over the digits, then pulled back. Edward's secret support over the years revealed a truth she'd been avoiding. He'd never really left them, not completely. But his help had always come from a safe distance, through intermediaries and anonymous donations. Could she really ask him now, after all these years, to step directly into their messy, complicated reality? The irony wasn't lost on her. After years of protecting Timmy from the truth about both his father's, Edward's, abandonment and James's manipulation, she now faced her own truth. She couldn't be both mother and father, provider and patient, strong and sick. For the first time since Edward left, Claire had to admit she couldn't handle everything alone. The business card sat on her nightstand, Edward's number a silent challenge in the darkness. Outside, the city hummed with late-night traffic, countless lives intersecting and diverging in the urban maze. Somewhere out there, Edward sat in his penthouse office, still watching over them from afar. Claire wondered if he ever looked down at the city lights and thought about what he'd left behind, what he'd protected from a distance but never dared to embrace up close. Timmy sat in the school library during lunch break, surrounded by medical textbooks borrowed from the senior science section. His latest research project wasn't for class, it was personal. He'd been documenting his own symptoms for months, the persistent fatigue, occasional fever spikes, and the strange bruises that appeared without explanation. His notebook contained carefully organized observations, written in the precise handwriting his teachers praised. Next to each symptom, he'd listed possible causes, cross-referenced with his mother's worried whispers to Aunt Sarah when they thought he was asleep. The latest entry included his mother's identical symptoms: her concealed exhaustion, the winces she tried to hide, the doctor's appointments marked vaguely as errands on their kitchen calendar. Mr. Peterson, his science teacher, found him there during lunch break. Quite heavy reading for a sixth grader, he commented, glancing at the medical texts. Most kids your age are reading comics during lunch. I'm researching genetic predisposition to certain conditions, Timmy replied, not looking up. Did you know some illnesses can skip generations? His academic achievements had become both shield and sword. The straight A's and science fair victories kept teachers from questioning too deeply about his home life. His advanced placement in mathematics meant he could help with the diner's books without raising suspicion. Being labeled gifted explained away his adult vocabulary, his too careful observations. But it couldn't hide everything. During parent-teacher conferences, he noticed how his mother's absence during daytime meetings drew concerned looks. He heard the whispers when he wore the same winter coat 2 years in a row, carefully mended at the seams. His emergency contact list was noticeably shorter than his classmates. The school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, tried to engage him in conversations about feelings, about family. Timmy had perfected the art of answering without revealing. Yes, my mom works a lot, but we're fine. No, I don't feel sad about not having a dad, each response carefully crafted to close doors before they could open too wide. At night, when insomnia struck, Timmy would sit by his window and work on his other project, a detailed spreadsheet tracking Edward Malone's business activities. He noted patterns in the company's charitable giving, traced connections between anonymous donations and their family's mysterious financial reprieves. The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. Edward had never truly abandoned them, just retreated to a safe distance. His research extended to genetics too. He'd compared photos of himself with young Edward Malone, noting shared features: the same slight furrow between their brows when concentrating, identical gestures when deep in thought. He understood probability well enough to know these similarities couldn't all be coincidence. The truth about James Wilson emerged through careful investigation. Library archives revealed old business papers showing the rivalry between Wilson and Malone. Timmy pieced together the timeline of his mother's brief relationship with Wilson, seeing it for what it was: calculated revenge against Edward. His latest discovery was the most troubling. Cross-referencing his mother's symptoms with medical journals had led him to a terrifying possibility. The same cancer that had taken his great-grandmother showed warning signs that matched his mother's hidden ailments perfectly. Worse, some of his own symptoms suggested the possibility of a related blood disorder. These revelations weighed heavily on his 11-year-old shoulders. During the day he maintained his facade of normalcy, the bright student, the helpful son. But at night, lying awake, he calculated finances in his head. His college fund, secretly checked during a trip to the bank with his mother, would barely cover a month of cancer treatments. That's when he'd made his decision to confront Edward, not just because of their possible connection, but because he'd recognized something in the businessman's public photos: the same loneliness he saw in his mother's eyes, the same careful mask he himself wore every day. The school bell rang, startling Timmy from his thoughts. He carefully returned the medical books to their shelves, tucked his notebook into his worn backpack, and straightened his second-hand uniform. Time to return to his role as the perfect student, hiding his adult worries behind a child's smile. The boardroom at Malone Industries hummed with tension on the morning James Wilson's hostile takeover bid became public. Edward sat at the head of the table, his face impassive as his CFO detailed Wilson's strategy. Through a series of shell companies and proxy buyers, Wilson had quietly accumulated nearly 15% of Malone Industries shares. He's positioning for a controlling interest, Thomas Reed, Edward's longtime legal counsel, explained. Wilson Capital has been approaching our smaller shareholders, offering above market prices. They're particularly targeting family-held shares. Edward's fingers tightened imperceptibly around his pen. Wilson's timing wasn't coincidental. The company's newest medical research division, focused on rare genetic disorders, was on the verge of several breakthrough patents. A takeover now would give Wilson control of potentially life-saving treatments. There's more, Reed continued, sliding a folder across the polished mahogany table. Wilson's been making inquiries about your past. He's hired private investigators to dig into your college years, particularly your time at Harvard. Edward opened the folder, his expression darkening as he read. Wilson wasn't just after his company, he was searching for leverage, any scandal or secret that could force Edward's hand. The investigation had led Wilson to Claire, to the diner, to the careful pattern of anonymous support Edward had maintained over the years. He's requesting access to all charitable giving records, Reed added quietly, particularly any anonymous donations made through the company's foundation. The implications were clear. Wilson had discovered Edward's secret support of Claire and Timmy. What had started as a business rivalry had become deeply personal. Wilson intended to expose everything, to paint Edward as a deadbeat father, to destroy not just his business empire but his reputation as well. There's a personal connection we need to discuss, Reed said, hesitating slightly. It appears Wilson had a brief relationship with Claire Walker 13 years ago, shortly after you. The lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. Our investigation suggests it wasn't coincidental. He sought her out specifically. Edward's pen snapped in his grip, ink staining his fingers like blood. The pieces clicked into place. Wilson's calculated pursuit of Claire, his sudden disappearance when she became pregnant, the years of financial hardship that followed. It had all been part of Wilson's long game, his patient strategy to wound Edward through the people he'd tried to protect from afar. "What are our options?" Edward asked, his voice carefully controlled. The board members exchanged glances. "We could counteroffer," the CFO suggested. "Buy back shares at a premium, or seek a white knight investor." "That's not what I meant," Edward interrupted. "I want to know our options for protecting Claire and Timmy. Wilson's made this personal. I want to know how to keep them safe." A heavy silence fell over the room. These titans of industry, used to dealing in billions, seemed unprepared for the human element suddenly at the center of their corporate war. Mr. Malone, Reed said carefully, "Any direct intervention on your part would only validate Wilson's allegations. It could make things worse for everyone involved." Edward stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere down there, Claire was serving coffee at the diner, unaware that she and Timmy had become pawns in a billionaire's revenge plot. Somewhere, Timmy was probably in school, carrying the weight of adult concerns no child should bear. "Schedule an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning," Edward said finally, still facing the window, "and get me everything you can find on Wilson's business practices over the last 15 years. Every deal, every transaction, every questionable decision." Sir Reed questioned, "Are you sure you want to?" "He made this personal." Edward cut him off, turning back to face the room. "He used Claire to get to me, used her situation to inflict pain. Now he's threatening to expose and humiliate her publicly." His voice hardened. "It's time to stop protecting people from a distance. Sometimes you have to step into the fight." The board members watched their CEO, seeing something new in his normally controlled demeanor. For the first time in years, Edward Malone wasn't just fighting for his company, he was fighting for his family. The diagnosis came on a rainy Tuesday morning, delivered in Dr. Bennett's gentle but firm voice. "Timmy's condition is rare, but not unknown," he explained, spreading test results across his desk. "It's a genetic blood disorder that affects the body's ability to produce healthy cells." Claire sat rigid in her chair, one hand clasped tightly around Timmy's, the other crumpling the edge of her waitress uniform. The doctor's words seemed to echo in the small office: specialized treatment, experimental protocols, extensive hospitalization. "The good news," Dr. Bennett continued, "is that it's treatable. The bad news is the cost. The treatment protocol alone runs into millions, not counting hospitalization and follow-up care." Timmy, unnaturally still for an 11-year-old, spoke up. "What about the genetic component, Dr. Bennett? Shouldn't we test Mum too?" The doctor's hesitation was brief but noticeable. "Actually, Claire, we should discuss your recent test results as well." And there it was, the other shoe dropping. Claire's own diagnosis: stage 2 breast cancer, aggressive but treatable if they acted quickly. The same disease that had taken her grandmother, now threatening to take her from Timmy. "We need to begin both treatments immediately," Dr. Bennett said, his voice gentle but urgent. "Timmy's condition is progressing faster than we'd like, and Claire, your cancer won't wait." The numbers he quoted seemed impossible: hundreds of thousands for Claire's treatment, millions for Timmy's. Insurance would cover a fraction, but their modest policy had limits that wouldn't come close to covering the full cost. "There are clinical trials," Dr. Bennett offered, seeing Claire's face. "Research programs. I have contacts at several teaching hospitals." "We'll find a way," Claire interrupted, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We always do." But walking out of the hospital, the magnitude of their situation hit her. The diner's health insurance wouldn't cover specialized treatment. Their savings, carefully built over years of sacrifice, would barely cover a week of care. Even if she sold everything they owned, worked every hour the day offered, it wouldn't be enough. Timmy squeezed her hand, his face too serious for his age. "Mom, I know about the headaches you've been hiding, the times you get dizzy at work. I've been researching symptoms." Of course he had. Her brilliant, observant boy who noticed everything, who carried adult worries behind his child's eyes. Claire pulled him close, there on the sidewalk outside the hospital, letting her tears fall into his dark hair that might soon fall out from treatment. "We should call him," Timmy said quietly. "Mr. Malone. He has resources, connections." "No," Claire said automatically, though her resolve felt weaker than before. "We can't." "Mom," Timmy pulled back, his expression eerily like Edward's when making a crucial point. "This isn't about pride anymore. This is about survival." Later that night, after Timmy was asleep, Claire sat at their small kitchen table surrounded by bills and medical papers, the numbers blurred before her eyes, past due notices, treatment estimates, school fees. Her own mortality stared back at her from the cancer diagnosis, while Timmy's genetic disorder threatened everything they'd built. Her phone sat on the table, Edward's business card propped against it. One call could change everything, but at what cost? She'd spent 13 years building a life without him, protecting Timmy from the pain of abandonment. Now, facing this dual medical crisis, she realized her pride might cost them everything. With trembling fingers, she picked up her phone. Before she could dial, a wave of dizziness hit her, one of many symptoms she'd been hiding. The room spun, her vision darkened, and Claire Walker, who had faced every challenge life threw at her with unwavering strength, finally collapsed. Timmy found her there, slumped over the kitchen table, medical bills scattered around her like fallen leaves. With a calm that belied his years, he picked up her phone and the business card. It was time, he decided, to take matters into his own hands. After all, he hadn't confronted Edward Malone on Christmas Eve just out of curiosity. He'd been preparing for this moment, knowing someday they would need more than silent support from afar. As he dialed the number, Timmy thought about genetics, not just the disorder threatening his life, but the inheritance of determination that came from both his mother and the man who'd left them. The allegations hit Joe's diner like a thunderbolt on a clear day. Claire arrived for her morning shift to find 2 police officers in the small office, Joe's weathered face grave as he held out a stack of financial documents. The accusation was devastating in its simplicity, thousands of dollars missing from the diner's accounts, all traced back to Claire's bookkeeping shifts. "I don't understand," Claire said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I balanced these books for years. Every penny is accounted for." But the evidence seemed irrefutable. Doctored bank statements, altered deposit slips, a trail of small discrepancies that added up to a damning whole. Someone had meticulously constructed a paper trail of theft, dating back 6 months exactly when Claire had taken on additional bookkeeping responsibilities. Joe, who had been like a father to her for 13 years, couldn't meet her eyes. "The police need to investigate, Claire. I have to suspend you pending their findings." The news spread through the small community like wildfire. Regular customers who had known Claire for years now avoided her gaze when she passed them on the street. Her weekend bookkeeping clients quietly found other services. The online tutoring platform suspended her account, citing the ongoing investigation. Sarah Martinez stood by her friend, fierce in her defense. "This is ridiculous. Claire's been keeping these books longer than anyone. She practically raised Timmy in this diner." But the damage was done. Without income from the diner, Claire's carefully balanced financial house of cards began to collapse. The health insurance tied to her job would terminate at the end of the month, just as both she and Timmy needed it most. The truth emerged in fragments. A new customer who had begun frequenting the diner months ago, a quiet man in expensive suits who always sat in Claire's section. The mysterious phone calls Joe received about investing in diner franchises. And finally, the connection the man worked for James Wilson's investment firm. "He's trying to buy the diner," Joe admitted to Claire one evening, having finally done his own investigation. Wilson Capital has been purchasing small businesses all over the neighborhood when I refused to sell. He trailed off, the implications clear. Claire was just collateral damage in Wilson's larger game, a way to pressure Joe into selling by destroying the diner's reputation through scandal. The fact that it would devastate Claire and Timmy was likely a bonus in Wilson's vendetta against Edward. The community began to split. Long-time customers like Mrs. Henderson staged a sit-in at the diner, refusing to let anyone else serve them. Others, worried about their own businesses in an area increasingly controlled by Wilson Capital, kept their distance. Timmy, ever observant, noticed the changes immediately. The whispers at school, the way other parents pulled their children away at pick-up time, the sudden cancellations of study group invitations. He watched his mother maintain her dignity through it all, even as their world crumbled around them. "Why don't you fight back?" he asked one night, helping her sort through bills at their kitchen table. "Tell people about Mr. Wilson, about what he's really doing." Claire looked at her son, seeing too much understanding in his young face. "Sometimes fighting back just makes things worse, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to wait for the truth to show itself." But the truth had a price. Without the diner's insurance, their medical bills mounted. Claire's cancer treatment couldn't wait for justice to prevail, and Timmy's condition required immediate attention. The careful balance she'd maintained for years was shattered, leaving them vulnerable just when they needed stability most. In desperation, Claire swallowed her pride and applied for other waitressing jobs. But Wilson's influence ran deep, and the accusations followed her. Each interview ended the same way: awkward silence, promises to be in touch, and the unspoken weight of suspicion. The final blow came when the hospital called to reschedule their upcoming treatments, citing insurance issues. Claire sat in their small living room after the call, staring at the wall of Timmy's academic achievements, each certificate and award a testament to their shared determination to build something meaningful from nothing. Now, that determination alone wasn't enough. They needed help, the kind that could only come from someone with the resources and influence to match Wilson's malice. Claire looked at Edward's business card, still sitting on the side table where Timmy had left it after his call for help went unanswered. The truth about Edward's involvement in their lives emerged through Sarah's determined detective work. After Claire's suspension from the diner, Sarah spent her free time piecing together 13 years of mysterious coincidences and unexplained assistance. "Look at this," she said one evening, spreading papers across Claire's kitchen table after Timmy had gone to bed. "Remember when the hospital miscalculated Timmy's surgery bill 5 years ago? The adjustment came through a foundation, the Malone Family Medical Fund." Claire's hands trembled as she examined the documents. There it was, a pattern so obvious she wondered how she'd missed it, the scholarship that had covered Timmy's school fees when she'd fallen behind. The anonymous donor who maintained a small emergency fund at Dr. Bennett's office. The mysterious rent reductions during particularly tight months. "He's been watching over us all along," Claire whispered, memories flooding back. The Christmas gifts that appeared mysteriously at their door each year, always containing exactly what Timmy needed. The anonymous college fund contributions that seemed to arrive whenever she mentioned college costs within earshot of diner customers. Sarah pulled out more evidence: newspaper clippings showing Edward at charity events benefiting single-parent families, grant applications approved by his foundation for local medical assistance programs, donations to their neighborhood school district earmarked for academic enrichment programs. "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice gentle. "Remember James Wilson's sudden departure when you were pregnant with Timmy? I found court records. Edward's legal team had uncovered Wilson's pattern of corporate harassment. They threatened to expose him unless he signed away all parental rights and left you alone." The revelation struck Claire like a physical blow. All these years she'd thought Edward had simply walked away, choosing ambition over love. Instead, he'd created an invisible safety net, protecting them from afar while respecting her pride and independence. The evidence continued to mount. Dr. Bennett finally admitted that Edward had established a special fund at the hospital years ago, specifically designed to help families struggling with medical bills. "He made me promise never to tell you," the doctor explained. "He said you'd refuse help if you knew it came from him." Even Joe had been part of the secret network. The diner's insurance policy, unusually comprehensive for a small business, had been subsidized through a program connected to Malone Industries. He came to me the day after he left. Joe confessed. Said he knew he'd hurt you, but wanted to make sure you always had a safe place to land. Timmy, listening from the top of the stairs after supposedly going to bed, felt vindicated. His own research had suggested Edward's involvement, but the scope of it surprised even him. The man hadn't just provided financial support, he'd created entire charitable programs and initiatives, helping others as cover for helping them. "Why?" Claire asked the empty air, staring at the evidence of 13 years of silent protection. "Why not just come back?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly regular customer who had always taken such interest in Timmy, revealed herself as Edward's former nanny from the orphanage. He was afraid, she explained over coffee one morning. Afraid of failing you like his parents failed him. Afraid his ambition would hurt you more if he stayed. In his mind, loving you meant protecting you from himself. The final piece fell into place when Sarah discovered the trust fund, a substantial account established in Timmy's name, untouched but growing steadily since his birth. Edward had funded it despite knowing Timmy wasn't his biological son, ensuring the boy would always have options his own orphaned childhood had lacked. Claire sat surrounded by the evidence of Edward's long-distance love, feeling the weight of years of misjudgment. He hadn't abandoned them, he'd simply loved them the only way he knew how, from a safe distance that protected them from both his ambition and his fears. The chain of events began with a simple gift box, elegantly wrapped and delivered to the diner on Christmas morning. Inside, Claire found plane tickets to New York, a key card to a high-end hotel suite, and a handwritten note in Edward's precise handwriting. "I've arranged everything. Please come. There are things you both need to know." Claire stood in the empty diner, snow falling softly outside, the gift box heavy with possibility in her hands. Timmy watched her from his usual spot at the counter, his young face serious. "We should go," he said simply. "Mom, we need help." The flight to New York felt surreal. Claire watched the clouds pass below, remembering another Christmas 13 years ago when she and Edward had planned their future on a napkin in this very city. Beside her, Timmy clutched his medical folder, insisting on bringing all their records just in case. Edward's driver met them at the airport, a silent, dignified man who handled their worn luggage with the same care he would give designer bags. The hotel suite he took them to overlooked Central Park, its luxury both overwhelming and somehow sad in its perfection. "Mr. Malone requests your presence for dinner," the driver said, handing them an envelope containing restaurant details. "He's arranged for appropriate attire to be delivered shortly." The clothes arrived within the hour, a beautiful emerald dress for Claire that fit perfectly, and a suit for Timmy that made him look heartbreakingly grown up. As they dressed, Claire noticed Timmy's hands shaking slightly as he attempted his tie. "Here," she said softly, kneeling to help him. "Your father, Edward, he always struggled with bow ties too." Timmy met her eyes in the mirror. "Is that why you taught me to tie them? Because of him?" The restaurant was empty when they arrived, decorated for Christmas but devoid of other guests. Edward stood as they entered, and Claire's breath caught at how time had changed him. Success had hardened his features, but his eyes still held that same vulnerability when he looked at her. "Claire," he said softly, then turned to Timmy. "Thank you both for coming." The dinner began formally with careful small talk about the weather and their flight. But as the evening progressed, the walls began to crack. Edward spoke of his years of watching from afar, of creating foundations and programs just to have legitimate ways to help them. "I thought I was protecting you," he admitted, his composed facade finally slipping. from my ambition, from my fears, from everything I thought would hurt you. I didn't realize that leaving would hurt you more than staying ever could." Before Claire could respond, Timmy suddenly swayed in his chair, his face alarmingly pale. "Mom," he whispered, before slumping forward. The next few moments were chaos. Edward was on his phone instantly, barking orders as Claire cradled Timmy's unconscious form. Within minutes, a private ambulance arrived, whisking them to the city's best hospital, where a team of specialists waited. "I've had them on standby," Edward explained as they rushed through hospital corridors. "Ever since I saw his medical records, I've had a team consulting on his case." Claire barely registered his words, focused entirely on Timmy's still form on the gurney. But later, sitting in the private waiting room Edward had arranged, she finally asked the question that had haunted her for years. "Why didn't you just tell me? About all the help, about watching over us?" Edward's response was interrupted by the doctor's arrival. The news was both devastating and hopeful. Timmy's condition was critical but treatable. However, the treatment would cost millions and require months of specialized care. "I've already authorized everything," Edward said before Claire could speak. "The best doctors, the best facilities, whatever he needs." Claire started to protest, but Edward gently took her hand. "Please," he said softly. "Let me do this. Not from a distance this time. Let me be here, really here, for both of you." Claire's days became an intricate dance of obligations and hidden pain. Her schedule was marked in different colors in a worn planner: red for diner shifts, blue for online tutoring sessions, green for bookkeeping clients, and black for medical appointments she couldn't afford to keep. The margins were filled with calculations, endless attempts to make insufficient numbers add up to survival. Her morning routine started at 4:30 a.m., preparing Timmy's medication and lunch before her opening shift at the diner. The early hours were the worst, when the cancer treatments left her nauseated and weak. She'd lean against the bathroom wall, waiting for the waves of dizziness to pass, timing her recovery against the unforgiving clock. "You're pushing too hard," Sarah warned one morning, catching Claire steadying herself against the diner's counter. "The doctors said you need rest between treatments." But rest wasn't an option. Even with Edward's offer of help, Claire insisted on maintaining some financial independence. Pride, perhaps, or the habit of self-reliance too ingrained to break. The diner's morning shift barely covered groceries. All her online tutoring sessions, conducted during her lunch break in the diner's back office, paid for utilities. Evening bookkeeping for local businesses supplemented Timmy's medical expenses. The physical toll was becoming impossible to hide. Regular customers noticed how she braced herself against tables, how her hands sometimes shook while pouring coffee. Her once perfect waitress smile now carried a strain around the edges, though her service remained impeccable. "Just let me help," Edward pleaded during one of his now regular visits to the diner. He'd taken to appearing during her shifts, sitting at the counter with untouched coffee, watching her push through obvious exhaustion. "I am," Claire responded, refilling his cup automatically. "You're helping with Timmy's treatments. That's enough." But it wasn't just about money anymore. Each job represented a piece of the independent life she'd built, proof that she could survive anything. The diner was her community, the tutoring her connection to education, the bookkeeping her professional dignity. The breaking point came during a parent-teacher conference at Timmy's school. Claire had scheduled it between her afternoon tutoring session and evening bookkeeping work. The room spun suddenly as she stood to leave, and only the quick reaction of Timmy's teacher prevented her collapse. "Mrs. Walker," the teacher said gently, helping her to a chair, "Timmy told me about your treatments, about all your jobs. He's worried about you." The thought of her son worrying, of him carrying that additional burden while fighting his own health battle, hit harder than any physical pain. That evening, Claire sat at their small kitchen table, medical bills spread before her like an impossible puzzle. Her phone buzzed with a text from her latest bookkeeping client, cancelling their contract. The small business owner had heard about the false allegations at the diner, despite Edward's efforts to suppress the story. Another income stream dried up, another piece of her independent life crumbling. In the living room, Timmy pretended to do homework while actually watching her with worried eyes. He'd grown too perceptive, too aware of adult concerns. She caught him checking her medication schedule, quietly refilling her water glass, trying to shoulder burdens no 11-year-old should bear. The next morning, Claire found herself in the diner's bathroom at 5 a.m., violently ill from her latest treatment. Sarah found her there, pale and shaking, still insisting she could work her shift. "Enough," Sarah said firmly, helping her friend up. "This isn't just about you anymore. Timmy needs his mother alive and healthy more than he needs your pride intact." The words penetrated Claire's exhaustion-clouded mind. She thought of Edward's repeated offers of help, of Timmy's worried glances, of the doctor's warnings about stress compromising her treatment's effectiveness. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and called the number she'd been avoiding. Edward answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting for this call. "I need help," Claire whispered, the words feeling both like defeat and relief. "Not just with money. I can't do this alone anymore." His response was immediate and gentle, lacking any trace of triumph or judgment. "I know. I've been waiting to hear those words for 13 years. Let me help you live, Claire. Let me help you be there for Timmy." That evening, Claire looked at her color-coded schedule and began to make changes. Red shifts at the diner reduced to part-time. Blue tutoring sessions cut back to manageable hours. Green bookkeeping clients transferred to trusted colleagues. And in the margins, a new color appeared, purple, for the rest her body desperately needed, for the treatment she could no longer ignore, for the help she finally allowed herself to accept. Edward Malone sat in his corner office, staring at 2 documents on his desk. On the left, a contract that would cement Malone Industries' position as a global leader, a merger worth billions. On the right, Timmy's latest medical report, each page detailing treatments that required not just money, but time and presence. His phone buzzed constantly, board members demanding decisions, shareholders seeking reassurance, Wilson's lawyers pressing for responses. But Edward's attention kept drifting to the small photo he'd placed on his desk, Claire and Timmy at the diner, captured by his private investigator years ago. A moment of shared laughter, neither aware they were being watched. "Sir," his assistant interrupted, "the board is waiting in the conference room. They're concerned about the merger delays." Edward nodded, straightening his tie. These meetings had once been his element, where he felt most alive. Now they felt like obligations, keeping him from the hospital, where Timmy underwent treatments, from the diner where Claire stubbornly continued working despite her own illness. In the conference room, faces turned to him expectantly. Thomas Reed, his legal counsel, began the presentation. "The Wilson situation is escalating. He's leveraging the merger negotiations against your personal situation. The board needs to know your intentions." Personal situation, such a clinical term for the mess he'd created 13 years ago. Edward looked around the table, seeing the concerned faces of people who'd helped build his empire. They'd followed his vision, trusted his judgment. Now that vision was blurring, priorities shifting like sand beneath his feet. "The merger deadline is tomorrow," his CFO reminded him. "If we don't move forward, shares will plummet. Jobs could be lost." Edward thought of his employees, thousands of families depending on his decisions. He'd built this company from nothing, created opportunities for others like himself who came from nothing. Could he risk all that for a chance to rectify old mistakes? The answer came during a late-night hospital visit. He'd stopped by after another marathon board meeting, expecting Timmy to be asleep. Instead, he found the boy awake, working on homework, despite his obvious exhaustion. "Mom says you built your company to help people," Timmy said, looking up from his textbook. "Is that true?" Edward sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair, considering the question. Initially, I built it to prove something. To show I could succeed despite coming from nothing. Helping people came later. Timmy nodded, wise beyond his years. But now you have to choose between helping lots of people a little bit or helping a few people a lot. That's hard. The simple observation struck Edward speechless. This child, fighting his own battles, had articulated the core of his struggle perfectly. Later that night, Edward returned to his office. The city lights sparkled below, his empire spread out before him. He thought about his own childhood in the orphanage, about the loneliness of success, about the family he'd pushed away in pursuit of proving himself. His assistant found him there at dawn, still in yesterday's suit, surrounded by spreadsheets and company reports. Cancel the board meeting, he instructed, and get me everything we have on alternative merger structures. There has to be a way to save both. The next weeks became a blur of hospital visits and business negotiations. Edward set up a temporary office in Timmy's hospital room, conducting video calls while helping with science homework. He learned to schedule board meetings around treatment sessions, to prioritize medical consultations over shareholder meetings. The business press speculated wildly about his changed behavior. Malone Industries CEO shows signs of distraction, one headline read. Corporate titan's strange hospital visits raise questions, declared another. His board members watched with growing concern as he delegated tasks he'd once insisted on handling personally. But they also saw something new in their CEO, a humanity that had been buried beneath years of driven ambition. The turning point came during a crucial merger negotiation. Edward was presenting virtually from Timmy's hospital room when Claire had a bad reaction to her treatment in the next room. Without hesitation, he ended the call mid-sentence, leaving stunned executives staring at blank screens. That evening, his oldest board member, Margaret Chen, visited him at the hospital. She found him sitting between Claire and Timmy's rooms, tie loosened, looking exhausted but somehow more at peace than she'd ever seen him. You know, she said, settling into the chair beside him, companies can survive change priorities. They can adapt to leaders who discover there's more to life than profit margins, but families need presence, commitment, love. Those things can't be delegated or rescheduled. Edward looked at her, seeing understanding in her eyes. I spent 13 years trying to protect them from afar, he admitted, thinking success would somehow make up for absence. I was wrong. The whispers started the day the local newspaper ran the story about Claire's suspension from the diner. Timmy walked into his 6th grade classroom to find his classmates huddled in groups, conversations dying as he passed. His usual seat in the front row, once surrounded by friends, suddenly became an island of isolation. My mum says your mother's a thief, Bradley Turner announced during lunch break, loud enough for the entire cafeteria to hear. That's why you wear second-hand clothes and can't afford normal stuff like everyone else. Timmy maintained his composure, carefully packing away his half-eaten lunch, the one his mother had prepared at 4:30 that morning, between bouts of chemotherapy sickness she thought he didn't know about. Your mum's wrong, he said simply, his voice steady despite the burning in his chest. The bullying evolved from verbal to physical. His books disappeared from his locker, reappearing in bathroom trash bins. Someone poured milk over his science project, the one he'd worked on between hospital visits, the one that might have earned him a scholarship to the summer science program. Mrs. Rodriguez, his favorite teacher, noticed the changes. She saw how Timmy, once eager to share answers, now sat quietly in class, how he'd started eating lunch alone in the library, buried in medical textbooks far beyond his grade level. You can talk to me, she offered one day, finding him analyzing his own blood test results instead of joining the class field trip he couldn't afford, about anything. But Timmy had learned early that adult sympathy, while well-meaning, couldn't change reality. It couldn't stop his classmates from mocking his worn uniforms or prevent their parents from pulling their children away when he approached. It couldn't erase the whispers about his mother's alleged crimes or silence the cruel jokes about his frequent hospital visits. The worst came during gym class. Exhausted from his latest treatment, Timmy stumbled during a basketball game. "Look," Bradley shouted, "the charity case can't even run straight. Maybe your mom should steal some coordination for you too." Something snapped inside Timmy. Years of maintaining perfect control, of being the good student, the brave patient, the understanding son, it all erupted in a single moment. His fist connected with Bradley's jaw before he even realized he'd moved. The principal's office was familiar territory. Timmy had spent hours there explaining his frequent medical absences. But this time was different. Bradley's parents wanted him expelled. Their lawyer mentioned words like assault and criminal tendencies, drawing pointed connections to his mother's situation. "Violence is never the answer," the principal began, but stopped short when Timmy finally spoke. "Did you know," he said quietly, "that stress can accelerate cellular deterioration in cancer patients? That every time my mom has to defend herself against false accusations, it could be reducing her chances of survival? That while Bradley's parents are threatening lawsuits, my mother is working 3 jobs between chemotherapy sessions to keep me in this school." The office fell silent. Timmy pulled out his notebook, the one where he tracked his mother's symptoms alongside his own, where he recorded medical terms and treatment protocols, where he calculated survival statistics late at night when sleep wouldn't come. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he continued, his voice stronger now, "but before you decide my future, you should know what you're really punishing me for." The expulsion threat was dropped, though Timmy received a week's suspension. Edward, upon hearing about the incident, immediately offered to transfer him to an exclusive private school. But Timmy refused. "Running away doesn't solve problems," he told Edward during one of their hospital room conversations. "You taught me that, even if you didn't mean to." Instead, Timmy turned his isolation into strength. He transformed the library into his kingdom, advancing far beyond his grade level in sciences. He started a peer tutoring program, helping struggling students who gradually forgot about his mother's alleged crimes in the face of his patient explanations of complex math problems. The bullies still existed, but their words held less power now. Timmy had learned something valuable from watching both his mother and Edward, that true strength wasn't in fighting back or running away, but in standing firm, in using adversity as fuel for growth. The headline in the Wall Street Journal was unequivocal: "Malone Industries CEO declines landmark Asian merger." The business world buzzed with speculation as Edward Malone, known for his ruthless pursuit of expansion, walked away from what would have been the largest deal in his company's history. The merger had been years in the making. It would have established Malone Industries as the dominant force in international markets, potentially doubling the company's value overnight. But it required Edward to relocate to Singapore for at least 2 years to oversee the integration personally. "But you're committing corporate suicide," Thomas Reed warned during a tense board meeting. "This merger was your vision, your legacy. The Asian markets won't forgive this level of insult." Edward sat at the head of the boardroom table, his decision already made. The morning's hospital visit had shown him what really mattered now. He'd watched Claire sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside Timmy's bed, exhausted from her own treatment, but refusing to leave their son alone. "Sometimes," Edward replied, "legacy needs to be redefined." The sacrifices came in rapid succession after that. He turned down speaking engagements at prestigious business forums, cancelled his annual investor roadshow, and delegated key client meetings to his executive team. Each decision sent ripples through the corporate world, causing stock fluctuations and passionate debates in financial circles. The Harvard Business School professorship he'd been offered, a position that would have cemented his place in business history, received a polite but firm rejection. Instead, Edward spent those hours in Timmy's hospital room, helping with homework and learning about his son's passion for science. "You're different now," Claire observed one evening, finding him reviewing quarterly reports while sitting beside Timmy's bed. The Edward the First knew would never have let anything distract him from success. "Maybe I've learned that success has different definitions," he responded, watching their sleeping son. "It took me 13 years to understand that." The board of directors called an emergency meeting when Edward announced his intention to restructure the company's charitable foundation. He wanted to shift its focus entirely to medical research and support for families facing serious illnesses, starting with the rare blood disorder affecting Timmy. "But this is personal, not business," one board member objected. "You're letting emotions cloud your judgment." "Yes," Edward agreed simply, "and that's exactly why it matters." The business press labeled it a midlife crisis. Competitors whispered about weakness, about the fierce corporate warrior going soft. Wilson Capital launched an aggressive PR campaign, suggesting that Malone Industries needed stronger leadership. But Edward remained unmoved. He installed a small office in the hospital's family room, running his empire between doctors' consultations and treatment sessions. His assistant learned to schedule board meetings around Timmy's medical procedures, and investors had to accept that their CEO now prioritized hospital visits over shareholder meetings. The most significant sacrifice came when China's largest technology conglomerate offered an exclusive partnership. The deal would have guaranteed Malone Industries' dominance in the Asian market for decades to come. The catch? It required Edward's immediate attention for the next 6 months in Beijing. The old Edward would have been on the next flight. Instead, he drafted a polite rejection while sitting beside Timmy during a particularly difficult treatment session. "You're giving up a lot," Timmy observed, wise beyond his years. "The nurses showed me the business news on their phones. They say you're destroying your company." Edward looked at his son, seeing Claire's perceptiveness in his eyes. "Companies can be rebuilt," he said softly. "Time with family can't be replaced." The words would have seemed like corporate suicide to his younger self, the ambitious orphan determined to prove his worth through success. But watching Claire fight her cancer with quiet dignity, seeing Timmy face his treatments with extraordinary courage, Edward finally understood what real value meant. The crisis struck on a quiet Sunday morning. Edward was reviewing contracts in Timmy's hospital room while Claire rested between her own treatments. Timmy had been unusually quiet, his normally sharp mind dulled by the latest round of medication. The first sign was subtle, a slight tremor in his hands as he tried to hold his water glass. Mum, Timmy's voice was barely a whisper. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. Claire was instantly awake, mother's instinct overriding her exhaustion. Edward reached Timmy just as the seizures began. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Medical staff flooded in, their urgent voices mixing with the harsh beeping of monitors. Edward found himself pushed against the wall, watching helplessly as doctors worked to stabilize his son. Claire stood frozen, her own illness forgotten in the face of her child's crisis. "His blood counts are critical," Dr. Bennett announced, his usual calm demeanor tense. "We need to start the emergency protocol immediately." The next hours became a blur of medical terms and life or death decisions. Timmy's condition, already serious, had deteriorated faster than anyone anticipated. The treatments that should have been helping were now causing complications. "We have 2 options," Dr. Bennett explained in the quiet of his office. "Continue with the current protocol and hope he stabilizes, or try an experimental treatment that could either save him or he left the sentence unfinished." But its weight filled the room. Claire, pale from her own battle with cancer, gripped Edward's hand. For the first time in 13 years, they were truly united, facing a parent's worst nightmare together. "What are his chances with the current treatment?" Edward asked, his business acumen forcing him to think in probabilities, even as his heart screamed against such cold calculations. 20%, maybe less, Dr. Bennett replied. "The experimental treatment offers better odds, but the risks are significant." And he hesitated. "The cost is substantial. Insurance won't cover experimental procedures." Edward almost laughed at that, as if money meant anything now. "Cost is not an issue," he said firmly. "What's the best chance for our son?" "Our son." The words slipped out naturally, and Claire's grip on his hand tightened. Dr. Bennet nodded, understanding passing between them. The doctor had watched Edward's transformation from distant benefactor to present father, had seen how he rearranged the business world to be by Timmy's side. The decision made, things moved quickly. Specialists were flown in from around the country. Edward's corporate jet, once used for billion-dollar deals, now shuttled medical equipment and experts. The hospital's pediatric wing became command central for saving one 11-year-old boy's life. Through it all, Timmy remained eerily aware, despite his condition. "Don't worry," he told his mother during a brief moment of consciousness. "The statistics on experimental treatments show promising results in cases like mine." Even now, he was trying to be strong for them. Claire's own health began to falter under the stress. Edward found her collapsed in the hospital chapel one evening, her body finally rebelling against the strain of maintaining strength for her son while fighting her own battle. "You need to rest," he insisted, supporting her back to her room. "Timmy needs you healthy." "I can't leave him," she whispered. "What if?" Edward held her then, 13 years of separation dissolving in their shared fear. "We'll take shifts," he promised. "He won't be alone for a second. But you have to take care of yourself too." The experimental treatment began on a Wednesday. Edward had cancelled a major board meeting, ignoring the business press's speculation about his company's future. Claire postponed her own treatment, against medical advice but with the fierce determination of a mother protecting her child. They sat on either side of Timmy's bed as the new medication began flowing through his IV. The boy's face was pale against the hospital sheets, but his eyes were clear and determined. "Did you know," Timmy said softly, his voice weak but still carrying that hint of academic enthusiasm, "that the success rate of experimental treatments often depends on the patient's support system? The presence of family can significantly impact recovery rates." The revelation came at 3 a.m. in Dr. Bennet's office, after another round of disappointing test results. Edward sat across from the doctor, his tie loosened, suit wrinkled from hours in hospital chairs. The experimental treatment wasn't working as hoped, and time was running out. "There's another option," Dr. Bennet said carefully, sliding a medical file across his desk. "One we haven't discussed because it's complicated. Timmy needs a bone marrow transplant. We found a match." Edward opened the file, his hands steady despite his exhaustion. His own medical results stared back at him, complete genetic compatibility with Timmy. The irony wasn't lost on him, though not Timmy's biological father, his bone marrow was a perfect match. "What aren't you telling me?" Edward asked, noting the doctor's hesitation. Dr. Bennet sighed, removing his glasses. "Your recent tests show early stages of a rare blood condition. Donating marrow in your condition carries significant risks. The procedure could accelerate your condition's progression. We're talking about potentially years off your life." Edward sat back, letting the information settle. Years off his life, years he'd already wasted chasing success instead of being with his family. Years that Timmy might not have without this transplant. "What are the odds for Timmy if I donate?" "With your marrow? 80% chance of full recovery. Without it," the doctor let the sentence hang. Edward stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city he'd once thought was the center of his world. His empire stretched across that skyline, buildings bearing his name, offices filled with people who depended on his decisions. "I'll need to make some arrangements," he said finally, turning back to Dr. Bennet. "How soon can we proceed?" "Edward," the doctor cautioned, "you need to understand. This isn't like writing a check or creating a foundation. This is your life we're talking about." "No," Edward corrected quietly. "This is Timmy's life we're talking about. Mine has already been lived mostly wrong, but I can finally do something right." The next morning, Edward called an emergency board meeting via video conference from the hospital. His appearance shocked them. Their usually immaculate CEO looked exhausted, his hospital surroundings a far cry from his pristine office. "I'm stepping down as CEO," he announced without preamble. "Effective immediately. Margaret Chen will take over as interim chief executive." The board erupted in protest. Questions about timing, about the company's stability, about his mental state flew across the screen. Edward let them talk, his mind already made up. "I've spent my life building this company," he continued when they quieted, "but I've learned recently that some things can't be built with money or power. Some things require a different kind of investment." Claire found him later in Timmy's room, watching their son sleep. She'd heard about his decision from Dr. Bennett, had seen the medical files explaining the risks. "You can't do this," she whispered fiercely. "Timmy wouldn't want you to sacrifice yourself." Edward turned to her, seeing the same fire that had made him fall in love with her 13 years ago. "I abandoned him once," he said softly. "I abandoned both of you. I won't do it again." "This isn't abandonment," Claire argued. "This is different. You're talking about risking your life." "No," Edward corrected her gently. "I'm talking about finally being a father. About showing Timmy that love isn't just words or money or distance protection. Sometimes it's giving everything you have, everything you are, for someone else." The papers were signed the next day. Edward's medical directive, his resignation letter, his new will ensuring Claire and Timmy would be cared for no matter what happened. As he signed each document, he felt a weight lifting, the burden of success, of reputation, of maintaining perfect control finally giving way to something simpler and more profound. The truth emerged through a series of old letters discovered in Margaret Chen's office while preparing for Edward's transition. Claire had gone to collect his personal items, still struggling with his decision to donate bone marrow despite his condition. In a locked drawer, she found a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, all dated from the year Edward left. The first letter was addressed to his board of directors, dated just days after he'd walked away from Claire. "I understand this decision may seem abrupt," he'd written, "but I cannot in good conscience pursue both family and corporate success. One would inevitably destroy the other, and I choose to sacrifice my personal happiness rather than risk destroying those I love." Claire's hands trembled as she read further. Each letter revealed another layer of the sacrifice she'd never known about. There was correspondence with James Wilson from 13 years ago, evidence that Edward had discovered Wilson's plan to pursue her as revenge. Instead of exposing Wilson publicly, Edward had quietly bought out his company's shares, forcing him to sign away any future claims to Timmy. A medical bill from 12 years ago caught her eye. It was for her grandmother's final hospital stay expenses Claire thought had been covered by insurance. The truth stunned her. Edward had paid for everything, ensuring through intermediaries that the bills would never reach Claire during her pregnancy. "He never wanted you to know," Margaret said softly, finding Claire surrounded by the papers. "He believed that knowing about his help would make you feel obligated, would prevent you from building your own life." A folder marked Educational Trust revealed more. Edward had established a scholarship foundation specifically designed to help single mothers complete their education. The requirements perfectly matched Claire's situation, ensuring she would qualify without ever suspecting his involvement. "Every success you achieved," Margaret explained, "he celebrated from afar. He kept newspaper clippings of your college graduation, Timmy's academic awards, even reviews of the diner when you became manager." The most painful discovery was a series of surveillance photos, not intrusive, but documenting moments of their lives through the years. Timmy's first day of school, Claire's graduation, birthday celebrations at the diner. Edward had watched their lives unfold from a distance, protective but never interfering, suffering his self-imposed exile in silence. A letter to his lawyer, dated just after Timmy's birth, laid out explicit instructions: "In the event of my death, everything goes to them." but they must never know about my surveillance, my protection. Let them believe they succeeded entirely on their own strength. Their independence is worth more than any inheritance. Claire found herself in the hospital chapel, the letters scattered around her. All these years she'd thought Edward had simply walked away, choosing ambition over love. The truth was far more complex. He'd chosen to sacrifice his own happiness, believing it was the only way to protect them from his driven nature, his fear of failing them as his parents had failed him. A final letter, never sent, broke her completely. Written the night after his first Christmas alone, my dearest Claire, today I saw you through the diner window, serving customers with that smile that once lit up my world. You looked tired but proud, already showing signs of the incredible mother you'll become. I want you to know that walking away was the hardest thing I've ever done, but watching you now, seeing your strength, I know it was right. You deserve better than a man who couldn't balance ambition with love, who might have destroyed your spirit in his drive for success. Timmy deserves better than a father afraid of repeating the abandonment he himself experienced. So I'll watch from afar, protecting without constraining, loving without imposing. Perhaps someday you'll understand that sometimes love means letting go, even when every fiber of your being screams to hold on. Margaret found her there hours later, still absorbing the weight of 13 years of unknown sacrifice. He's in pre-op now, the older woman said gently. The bone marrow procedure begins in an hour. Claire looked up, her vision blurred with tears. He's been giving up everything for us from the very beginning, hasn't he? We just couldn't see it. Love takes different forms, Margaret replied. Sometimes it's presence, sometimes it's protection from a distance. Edward chose the harder path, loving you enough to let you hate him, protecting you enough to let you believe you didn't need him. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before Claire as she hurried toward the surgical wing. In one room, her son fought for his life. In another, Edward prepared to risk his own to save Timmy. The weight of 13 years of misunderstandings and hidden sacrifices pressed against her chest with each step. She found Edward in pre-op, already changed into a hospital gown that made him look strangely vulnerable. Gone was the powerful CEO, replaced by a father preparing to make the ultimate sacrifice. His hands, usually steady with corporate confidence, trembled slightly as he signed the final consent forms. I read the letters, Claire said softly, standing in the doorway. All these years I thought you left because you didn't love us enough. But you left because you loved us too much, didn't you? Edward looked up, his eyes meeting hers with the same intensity that had first drawn her to him in college. I thought I was protecting you from myself, he admitted. From my drive, my ambition, my fear of failing you like my parents failed me. I never realized that staying away would cause more pain than staying ever could. The monitors in Timmy's room began alarming before Claire could respond. Medical staff rushed past them, their urgent voices echoing off sterile walls. Dr. Bennett appeared, his face grave. We need to begin now, he announced. Timmy's counts are dropping faster than anticipated. Edward, are you ready? Claire watched as they wheeled Edward toward the operating room. Just before the doors closed, he caught her hand. Whatever happens, he said firmly, know that every decision I made, right or wrong, was out of love. The waiting room became Claire's world. Hours stretched like years as she sat between two operating rooms, torn between her son and the man who'd loved them enough to let them go. Sarah arrived with coffee that grew cold, untouched. Joe brought sandwiches that remained wrapped and forgotten. Timmy's surgery came first, preparing his system to receive Edward's bone marrow. Through the observation window, Claire watched her son, so small on the operating table, surrounded by machines and medical staff. His research notebooks sat in her lap, filled with his careful documentation of both his condition and hers, his childish handwriting detailing survival statistics and treatment protocols. Edward's procedure began as Timmy's ended. The risks loomed larger now that Claire understood the full extent of his condition. The bone marrow donation could accelerate his own illness, potentially cutting years from his life. Yet he'd signed the forms without hesitation, trading his future for Timmy's. Dr. Bennett emerged periodically with updates, his scrubs bearing testament to the lengthy procedures. Timmy's accepting the preparation well, he reported. Edward's donation is proceeding as planned, though his vitals are showing some strain. The night deepened, hospital lights casting harsh shadows across worried faces. Margaret Chen arrived, still in her business suit, bearing news of the corporate world they'd left behind. The board sends their support, she said quietly. They finally understand what Edward's been trying to teach them about priorities. Dawn was breaking when Dr. Bennett appeared one final time, exhaustion evident in his stance. The waiting room fell silent, every face turned toward him, waiting. The procedures are complete, he announced. Timmy's body is accepting the marrow. His numbers are already improving, he paused, and Claire's heart stopped. Edward experienced some complications, but he's stable. The next 24 hours will be critical for both of them. They were placed in adjacent recovery rooms, father and son connected now by more than love and sacrifice. Through the glass walls, Claire could watch both of them, her world condensed to the steady beeping of monitors and the gentle rise and fall of two chests. Timmy woke first, his eyes finding hers with characteristic clarity despite the medication. Did it work, he whispered. Is he okay? Claire took his hand, marveling at the strength in his fragile grip. He's fighting, just like you. He loves you so much, Timmy. He always has, even when we couldn't see it. The first complications appeared 3 days after the transplant. Edward's condition deteriorated rapidly, his body struggling to recover from the bone marrow donation. His immune system, already compromised by his underlying condition, began failing. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about organ stress and accelerated progression. In the adjacent room, Timmy battled his own crisis. Though his body hadn't rejected the transplant, his recovery wasn't following the expected pattern. Fevers spiked without warning, each one more severe than the last. Claire found herself running between rooms, torn between her son's struggles and Edward's decline. Mum, Timmy called out one particularly difficult night, his voice weak but determined. You need to stay with him. I can hear the nurses talking. He's worse than they're telling us. Claire stood in the doorway between their rooms, watching two battles unfold simultaneously. Her own cancer treatment had been postponed, a dangerous decision, but one she couldn't avoid. The doctors warned her about the risks of delay, but how could she focus on herself when her world was falling apart in 2 different hospital rooms? Dr. Bennett gathered them for a family conference, his usual optimism tempered by concern. We're facing a complex situation, he explained. Edward's donation has given Timmy a fighting chance, but the procedure has accelerated Edward's condition beyond our worst predictions. And Claire, he added gently, your cancer isn't waiting patiently while you take care of them. The numbers were staggering. Edward's organ function was declining at an alarming rate. Timmy's fever cycles were becoming more frequent, more dangerous. Claire's delayed treatment meant her cancer might have progressed to a more aggressive stage. The night shift nurses began calling them the Trinity Room, 3 patients, 3 battles, one family finally united only to face the possibility of ultimate separation. They watched as Claire moved between beds, reading to Timmy from his beloved science books, while holding Edward's hand, maintaining her vigil even as her own strength wavered. Edward drifted in and out of consciousness, but his moments of clarity were filled with purpose. He used every ounce of strength to update his will, ensure his company would continue supporting medical research, and most importantly, to spend time with Timmy. Tell me about your latest science project, he whispered during one lucid period, his voice faint but interested. Timmy, despite his own pain, lit up as he explained his theories about genetic markers and inherited traits. The medical staff monitored all 3 with growing concern. Claire's exhaustion became more pronounced, her own symptoms increasingly difficult to hide. Timmy's fevers began affecting his cognitive function, though he fought to stay alert during Edward's conscious moments. And Edward's decline continued, each day bringing new complications. Dr. Bennett finally intervened one morning, finding Claire asleep in a chair between the two beds, her own hospital gown wrinkled from constant movement between rooms. "This can't continue," he said firmly. "We need to transfer all of you to intensive care. You're all critical, whether you want to admit it or not." The hospital lobby had become a media circus. Reporters camped out day and night, their cameras trained on every entrance, waiting to capture any glimpse of the Malone family drama. The headlines grew more sensational by the day: corporate titan sacrifices all for non-biological son. Mother's cancer battle overshadowed by CEO's heroics. Malone Industries in turmoil as CEO fights for life. Hospital security worked overtime keeping journalists from sneaking onto the patient floors. Some posed as flower delivery personnel, others as distant relatives. One particularly determined reporter even attempted to gain access dressed as a member of the cleaning staff. Inside the ICU, the family remained isolated from the chaos, but its effects still penetrated their sanctuary. Nurses brought in newspapers despite orders not to, their faces showing concern as stock prices plummeted and business analysts predicted Malone Industries' downfall. The company Edward had built from nothing was suffering in his absence, yet he showed no regret about his choice. The hospital administration faced mounting pressure. Having 3 high-profile patients in crisis created unprecedented scrutiny of their care protocols. Every decision, every medication change, every procedure was analyzed and debated by medical experts in the media. Sarah arrived one morning in tears, holding the latest tabloid. They'd somehow obtained old photos of Claire from her waitressing days, contrasting them with Edward's society appearances. The article implied a calculated manipulation on Claire's part, suggesting she'd orchestrated the entire situation to gain control of Edward's fortune. "They're calling Timmy a convenient prop in some grand scheme," Sarah sobbed, shredding the paper in fury. "How dare they? They don't know anything about what you've all been through." The hospital's patient relations department was overwhelmed with calls and emails. Well-wishers sent countless flowers and cards, while critics demanded to know why a CEO received priority treatment while other patients waited for care. The truth about Edward's condition being accelerated by his choice to donate marrow only fueled more controversy. Even some of Malone Industries' shareholders joined the fray, filing lawsuits claiming Edward's decision to step down and risk his life constituted a breach of fiduciary duty. Their lawyers demanded access to his medical records, arguing that shareholders had a right to know the full extent of his condition. Dr. Bennett faced his own challenges. His peers questioned his judgment in allowing a high-risk bone marrow donation from a patient with an underlying condition. Medical ethics boards debated the decision in professional journals, turning their private medical crisis into a case study for public consumption. Through it all, the ICU staff maintained their protective circle around the family. They screened calls, intercepted unauthorized visitors, and most importantly, created a buffer between the circus outside and the very real human drama unfolding in those 3 adjacent rooms. The breaking point came on a quiet Tuesday night. Timmy, fevered and exhausted, woke to find Claire sobbing silently by Edward's bedside. The monitors showed his condition worsening, each beep a countdown they couldn't stop. "This is my fault," Timmy whispered, his voice carrying in the stillness. "If I hadn't gone looking for him on Christmas Eve, if I hadn't made him feel guilty about leaving." Claire turned, finding her son's eyes filled with a pain no 11-year-old should know. "No, sweetheart. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." "But it is," Timmy insisted, trying to sit up despite his weakness. "I researched everything about him, tracked his movements, planned that meeting. I thought if he knew about us he'd help with the medical bills. I never meant for him to sacrifice himself." Edward stirred at the sound of their voices, his consciousness surfacing through layers of medication. "You gave me a gift," he managed, each word a struggle. "The chance to finally do something right." Claire moved between them, her own exhaustion evident in every movement. The weight of delayed cancer treatments showed in her pale face, in the tremor of her hands as she adjusted Edward's blanket. "I should have told you," she said to Edward. "About James Wilson's threats, about Timmy's first symptoms, about everything. Pride kept me silent, and now look at us." The night shift nurse found them like that, three wounded souls trying to bear each other's guilt. She watched as Claire winced from her own pain while comforting Timmy, as Edward fought to stay awake despite his failing strength, as Timmy tried to hide his fever to avoid worrying his parents. "Sometimes," the nurse said, adjusting medications with practiced hands, "love makes us hurt ourselves trying to protect others. The trick is learning we're stronger together than apart." That night became a turning point. In the darkness of the ICU, each of them faced their deepest fears. Timmy confessed his terror of being left alone, of losing both parents to illness. Claire acknowledged that her independence had become a wall, keeping out help they desperately needed. Edward spoke of his years of regret, of watching from afar and mistaking distance for protection. "I wanted to be perfect," Claire admitted, her voice breaking, "to prove I could do it all alone, but I was just scared of needing someone, scared of being left again." "And I was scared of becoming my parents," Edward responded, "so afraid of failing you that I failed you completely by leaving." Timmy reached for both their hands, creating a physical link between his hospital beds. "Can we stop being scared together?" he asked, wisdom beyond his years in his tired eyes. "Can we just be a family, even if it's not perfect?" The monitors beeped steadily in the background, marking time as three separate battles merged into one shared struggle for survival. None of them knew if they would all make it through, but at least now they faced their fears united rather than alone. The community's response divided along sharp lines. At the diner, Joe posted a simple sign supporting the Walker-Malone family and started a donation jar that quickly overflowed with small bills and coins from regular customers. But across town, at the prestigious Oak Hill Country Club where Edward had once been a member, whispers circulated about his emotional breakdown and abandonment of corporate responsibility. Timmy's school became a battleground of conflicting sympathies. While his teachers organized a card-writing campaign and his classmates created a science fair project in his honor, some parents withdrew their children from shared activities, as if misfortune might be contagious. Bradley Turner's mother loudly withdrew her son from the peer tutoring program Timmy had started, claiming she couldn't trust the judgment of that family. The hospital staff witnessed the social divide firsthand. Wealthy donors threatened to withdraw funding over the preferential treatment of the Malone-Walker family, while working-class patients in the cancer ward organized a prayer circle for Claire. One nurse found herself reprimanded for accepting a casserole from a patient's family to take to Claire, while another was offered a bribe by a tabloid reporter for photos of Edward's decline. The medical board called an emergency meeting to address the situation. The hospital's reputation was at stake. Treating three high-profile patients whose cases had become fodder for public debate created unprecedented challenges. Some board members argued for transferring them to different facilities to dilute the attention. Others defended keeping the family together as essential to their recovery. At the diner, the regular customers formed protective ranks. When reporters tried to interview staff about Claire's alleged embezzlement, Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who'd known Edward as a child, stood up from her usual booth. "That woman," she announced loudly, "has more integrity in her little finger than you vultures have in your whole bodies. Now get out before I forget my manners entirely." The corporate world's reaction proved equally polarizing. While some companies distanced themselves from Malone Industries, others publicly praised Edward's choice of family over fortune. Young executives began speaking out about work-life balance, using the Malone story to challenge traditional corporate culture. Local churches found themselves divided. Some praised Edward's sacrifice and called for community support, while others criticized the moral implications of his past abandonment and current choices. Prayer groups formed and dissolved along lines of social class and moral judgment. The hospital's security team documented daily incidents: wealthy society women attempting to deliver casseroles laced with recording devices, corporate rivals trying to access medical records, and sincere working-class families leaving handmade gifts and cards. Each visitor had to be screened, each gift inspected, as the public's fascination with the family's crisis grew. Through it all, the ICU staff maintained their professional distance, treating the 3 patients with the same care they showed everyone. But even they couldn't help being affected by the drama unfolding in their unit, where love, sacrifice, and redemption played out under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The truth emerged through a series of old photographs discovered in Mrs. Henderson's attic. The elderly widow had been cleaning out boxes when she found them: faded images from St. Michael's Home for Children, dated 26 years ago. In one photo, a young Edward sat reading to a small girl with familiar eyes: Claire's mother, Karen. They were here together, Mrs. Henderson explained, showing the photos to Claire in the ICU. Edward was 12, Karen was 8. They were inseparable for almost a year before Karen was adopted. She used to call him her protective big brother. The revelation stunned Claire. Her mother, who had abandoned her at the same age, had once been protected by Edward in that same orphanage. The connection explained so much: why Edward had tracked Karen's movements over the years, why he'd ensured Claire's grandmother had support raising Claire, why he'd recognized something in Claire when they first met in college. More connections surfaced as Mrs. Henderson shared the orphanage's history. Edward's decision to leave Claire had mirrored Karen's later abandonment of her own daughter, both driven by a deep-seated fear of inadequacy ingrained by their orphanage experiences. Both had convinced themselves that leaving was an act of love, protecting their loved ones from their own damaged nature. The day Karen was adopted, Mrs. Henderson recalled, Edward made her promise to stay strong, to never let anyone make her feel unwanted. He didn't know then that she would later break that promise to her own daughter. The most painful revelation came in the form of a letter Karen had written to Edward years later, never sent but preserved in the orphanage's records. In it she confessed her failure as a mother, begging him to watch over her daughter Claire if he ever crossed paths with her. By some twist of fate he had done exactly that, first as a lover, then as a distant protector. James Wilson's connection to the story proved even more calculated than anyone had suspected. He had discovered the orphanage connection during his rivalry with Edward, using it to orchestrate his chance meeting with Claire. His pursuit of her hadn't just been about hurting Edward, it had been about destroying the family bond Edward had tried to preserve since his orphanage days. "You both tried to protect me by leaving," Claire said to Edward, holding the old photographs. "You and my mother both thought absence was better than imperfect presence, but you're the only one who kept watching, kept caring, even from a distance." Edward, weak but conscious, looked at the photos with tear-filled eyes. "I failed Karen," he whispered. "I promised to protect her, and she ended up just as lost as the rest of us. When I met you, it felt like a second chance. Then I made the same mistake she did." Timmy, listening from his bed, added his own perspective. "But you came back," he said firmly. "When it really mattered, when we truly needed you, you came back. That's what makes you different." The photographs circulated among the hospital staff, adding another layer to the family's story. The image of young Edward protecting Karen became a symbol of their intertwined fates, how patterns of love and fear, protection and abandonment had shaped 3 generations. Dr. Bennett burst into the ICU at dawn, clutching a set of test results with trembling hands. The night had been critical for all 3 patients, but what he'd discovered in their latest blood work defied conventional medical expectations. "It's extraordinary," he explained to the gathered specialists. "Timmy's body isn't just accepting Edward's bone marrow, it's thriving. The genetic markers are showing unprecedented levels of compatibility. And there's more." He spread the results across the conference table. Claire's latest scans show her cancer responding to treatment at an accelerated rate, despite the delays in her therapy. The medical team gathered around the results, their excited whispers filling the room. Edward's condition, which had been deteriorating rapidly after the donation, had suddenly stabilized. His organ function, previously in sharp decline, showed signs of recovery. "It's as if their bodies are fighting together," one specialist observed, pointing to the synchronized improvement in their numbers. "The timing of their recoveries is too perfectly aligned to be coincidental." Dr. Bennett moved between the 3 rooms, sharing the news with each patient. Timmy, his fever finally broken, listened with the keen interest of a budding scientist. "So the genetic compatibility between Edward and me is helping both of us?" he asked, already reaching for his research notebook. "More than that," Dr. Bennett explained. "Your mother's cancer markers are responding to the same treatment protocol we developed for your condition. The genetic factors we discovered while treating you have given us a new approach to her type of cancer." Claire, sitting up in her bed for the first time in days, held Edward's hand through the gap between their rooms. "All this time," she said softly, "our bodies knew what our hearts were trying to tell us. We're stronger together than apart." The recovery wasn't instant, but it was steady. Each day brought new signs of improvement. Timmy's color returned, his natural enthusiasm for learning reigniting as his strength grew. Claire's latest scans showed the cancer retreating, her body responding to treatment with renewed vigor. Edward's recovery surprised even the most optimistic doctors. The man who had been prepared to sacrifice everything for his son found his own health returning, as if his body's act of giving had somehow triggered its own healing response. The medical staff began documenting everything, recognizing that this case could change their understanding of genetic compatibility and family bonds in treatment protocols. Dr. Bennett spent hours writing detailed notes, knowing that this breakthrough could help countless other families facing similar battles. "It's not just the medical side," he explained to his colleagues. "We're seeing the physical impact of emotional healing. Their bodies are responding to more than just the treatments. They're responding to being together, to finally facing their challenges as a family." The ICU nurses noted another change. The 3 patients who had been fighting separate battles now coordinated their recovery efforts. Timmy used his research skills to understand their treatments, sharing his findings during their daily family meetings. Claire brought her organizational abilities to their recovery plans, while Edward's determination inspired them all to push through difficult therapy sessions. The unraveling of James Wilson's empire began with a single email discovered by Margaret Chen while reviewing old company records. The message, dated 13 years ago, detailed Wilson's deliberate plan to use Claire as a weapon against Edward, including his orchestration of their chance, meeting and his calculated abandonment when she became pregnant. The evidence mounted quickly once investigators knew where to look. Bank records showed systematic harassment of small businesses in Claire's neighborhood, all aimed at pressuring the diner where she worked. Documents revealed Wilson's role in the false embezzlement accusations, complete with fabricated evidence and paid witnesses. "He didn't just want to hurt Edward," Margaret explained to the district attorney. "He wanted to destroy everything Edward cared about, even from a distance. The fact that Claire and Timmy would be collateral damage meant nothing to him." The arrest took place during a Wilson Capital Board meeting. Federal agents interrupted Wilson's presentation on hostile takeovers, an ironic moment that wasn't lost on the business press. As he was led out in handcuffs, his carefully constructed facade finally cracked. "Malone deserved it," he shouted, his composed corporate image shattering. "He took everything from me at Harvard. The internship, the connections, the future that should have been mine. I just returned the favor." The confession, captured by dozens of cell phones and immediately viral, opened the floodgates. Former employees came forward with stories of Wilson's manipulation and cruelty. Business rivals revealed decades of underhanded tactics and corporate sabotage. Even his own board members turned against him, providing evidence of financial misconduct stretching back years. Claire's name was officially cleared. The diner received a formal apology from the police department, accompanied by evidence that Wilson had orchestrated the entire embezzlement scheme. Joe framed the retraction article and hung it prominently behind the counter, right next to Claire's original hiring photo. The DA's office moved quickly, building a case that went far beyond corporate crime. This was a systematic campaign of psychological warfare, the prosecutor announced. Mr. Wilson didn't just commit financial crimes, he deliberately targeted a single mother and her child as part of a decades-long vendetta. In the hospital, Timmy followed the news of Wilson's downfall with keen interest. He thought hurting us would hurt Edward, he observed, his young mind grasping the complexity of adult revenge, but he actually brought us together instead. The legal community buzzed with the implications of the case. Wilson's actions set new precedents for corporate accountability and personal liability. Law schools began including the case in their ethics curricula, examining how personal vendetta had corrupted corporate power. Claire's testimony, given from her hospital room via video link, proved devastating to Wilson's defense. She detailed years of subtle harassment, of mysterious business setbacks, of opportunities that vanished without explanation. Her quiet dignity in recounting these events struck a chord with the public. Edward, still recovering, refused to testify personally against Wilson. He's already lost everything that matters, he told the prosecutors. His reputation, his company, his freedom. Adding my voice won't change anything. The final blow came from an unexpected source, Wilson's personal assistant of 20 years. She provided recordings of Wilson gloating about his plans, including his deliberate targeting of Timmy's school and medical care. The tapes revealed a level of calculated cruelty that shocked even his own defense team. The final truths emerged during a quiet evening in their shared hospital room. Claire had been wrestling with a secret of her own, one that made their healing journey even more miraculous. During one of her routine scans, doctors had discovered she was pregnant, a possibility they'd said was nearly impossible given her cancer treatments. I didn't want to say anything at first, she confessed to Edward, her voice trembling. With everything happening, and all the uncertainty, she placed his hand on her still flat stomach. But this baby, like Timmy, is teaching me about hope. Edward's response was immediate and profound. He broke down, tears flowing freely for the first time since his childhood. A second chance, he whispered, not just at being a father, but at being there from the beginning. Timmy, listening from his bed, added his own revelation. He pulled out a worn notebook filled with letters ones he'd written to Edward every year on his birthday, documenting his life, his thoughts, his hopes for meeting his father someday. I always knew you were watching over us, Timmy explained, handing the notebook to Edward. I found the newspaper clippings Mom kept, saw the pattern in the help that always came when we needed it most. I wanted you to know that I saw you, even when you thought you were invisible. Edward's secret foundation work came to light as well. Beyond the anonymous donations and quiet assistance, he'd been building a network of support for single parents and their children. Every major city where Malone Industries operated had programs in place, all designed to prevent other families from facing the struggles Claire and Timmy had endured. I couldn't be there in person, Edward admitted, so I tried to create safety nets everywhere I could. Each new success in business became another opportunity to protect you from afar. The nurses who had watched their journey unfold brought in a scrapbook they'd compiled of the family's healing process. Photos showed their gradual recovery, not just physically but emotionally. The distance between their beds growing smaller, shared smiles becoming more frequent, the walls of past hurts slowly crumbling. Claire's final secret was perhaps the most poignant. She revealed that she'd never changed her emergency contact information at the hospital. Edward's name had remained listed all these years, a silent acknowledgement that despite everything, he was still family. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind isn't ready to admit, she said softly. Even when I was angriest, some part of me knew you'd come if we really needed you. These revelations, shared in the quiet of their recovery room, became the foundation for their future. Not just a family rebuilt, but one strengthened by the very breaks that had once threatened to destroy it. 1 year later, the diner hosted a private celebration. The familiar bell above the door chimed as Edward, now fully recovered, held it open for Claire and Timmy. The interior had been transformed, Christmas lights twinkled across the ceiling, and a banner reading 1 year of family stretched across the counter. Joe had closed the diner for the evening, allowing only their closest friends to attend. Sarah decorated each table with photos documenting their journey, hospital pictures showing their gradual recovery, Timmy's triumphant return to school, Claire's last cancer treatment, Edward's first day back at the newly restructured Malone Industries. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Claire said, running her fingers over a photo of their first family breakfast in the diner after leaving the hospital. She looked healthier now, her face filled with color, her eyes bright with renewed energy. The cancer was in remission, her strength returning more each day. But Timmy, now 12 and finally catching up on the growth he'd missed during his illness, proudly showed off his latest science fair trophy. His project on genetic markers and family bonds had won first place, inspired by his own medical journey. Dr. Bennett had even asked to use his research notes in a medical journal article. "Remember my first day back at school?" Timmy asked, pointing to another photo. The image showed Bradley Turner, his former bully, now his lab partner and friend. Their shared experience with serious illness, Bradley's mother had been diagnosed with cancer shortly after Wilson's arrest, had bridged the gap between them. Edward, more relaxed in casual clothes than his former business suits, watched his family with quiet joy. The past year had transformed him as much as any of them. He'd restructured Malone Industries to prioritize medical research and family support programs, turning his corporate success into a force for positive change. The diner itself stood as a testament to their recovery. After Wilson's conviction, Edward had helped Joe expand, not through corporate takeover but through partnership. The small business remained independent, but now offered healthcare coverage for all employees and educational support for their children. Mrs. Henderson arrived with her signature apple pie, the same recipe she'd made for Edward at the orphanage all those years ago. "Full circle," she said, setting it on the counter. "From lost children to found family." Dr. Bennett joined them later, carrying thick medical files. "Your cases are being studied in medical schools now," he announced proudly. "The way your recovery's synchronized, how your bodies seem to heal better together than apart, it's changing how we think about family support during treatment." The evening was filled with small moments of triumph. Claire serving coffee with steady hands, no trace of the weakness that had plagued her during treatment. Timmy climbing the stairs to his favorite booth without getting winded, his body strong and healthy. Edward relaxed and present, no longer watching from a distance but fully engaged in every moment. "I have something to show you," Claire said, pulling out a worn envelope. Inside was the newspaper clipping she'd kept of Edward all those years, the one Timmy had shown him that fateful Christmas Eve. Next to it she placed a new photo, their first family portrait taken just last week. "Look how far we've come," she said softly, the two images bridging 13 years of separation and 1 year of healing. From broken pieces to whole. The transformation of Malone Industries became a case study in corporate evolution. Edward's return to the company brought fundamental changes, starting with the creation of the Malone Family Health Initiative, a foundation dedicated to supporting families facing medical crises. The boardroom, once dominated by profit discussions, now balanced financial goals with social impact. Edward's experience had taught him that true success couldn't be measured solely in dollars. The company's new mission statement, "Building Business, Supporting Families," reflected this shift in priorities. Claire found her own professional renaissance. The diner became a launching pad for her new career in hospital administration, specifically focusing on family support services. Her experience as both a patient and a caregiver gave her unique insight into the needs of families facing medical challenges. "We're revolutionizing how hospitals approach family care," she explained at a healthcare conference, her confidence now matching her expertise. "Every policy we implement is based on real experience, not just theoretical models." Timmy's academic achievements continued to soar, but with a new purpose. His trauma had transformed into motivation, leading him to create a peer support program for children with serious illnesses. The program, initially started at his school, spread to other districts, earning recognition from the State Education Board. "Knowledge is more powerful when it's shared," Timmy told a reporter during an interview about his program. "Understanding what you're fighting helps you fight better." Edward's corporate leadership style underwent its own evolution. He remained sharp and strategic, but compassion now tempered his decisions. The company's new family-first policies, including unlimited sick leave for parents with ill children, set new standards in corporate America. The business press, initially skeptical of these changes, had to acknowledge their success. Malone Industries' productivity increased as employee loyalty strengthened. The company's reputation attracted top talent who valued purpose alongside profit. Claire's experience managing the diner's books during crisis developed into a specialized consulting service, helping small businesses implement family-friendly policies without sacrificing profitability. Her program, Balance for Success, became required reading in business schools. The diner itself evolved into a model of community business practices. Joe and Edward's partnership created a template for how large corporations could support small businesses without absorbing them. The expanded diner now included a family resource center, offering free advice on medical and financial challenges. "This isn't just about business anymore," Edward explained at a shareholders' meeting. "It's about creating a corporate culture that strengthens families instead of forcing them to choose between work and well-being." Their professional lives, once separated by ambition and circumstance, now intertwined in meaningful ways. Edward's corporate resources supported Claire's healthcare initiatives. Timmy's research contributed to the company's medical foundation. Every success built upon the others, creating a sustainable cycle of positive change. The Malone Walker Family Center opened its doors on a crisp autumn morning, exactly 1 year after their hospital ordeal. Located in a renovated brownstone between the hospital and the diner, the center embodied everything they had learned through their journey. The first floor housed a comprehensive support center for families facing medical crises. Claire oversaw this division, implementing programs based on their own experiences. Each family received personalized assistance from medical bill navigation to emotional counseling, from childcare during hospital visits to educational support for sick children. "We create the support system we wished we had," Claire explained during the opening ceremony. "Every service here was born from a real need we experienced during our crisis." The second floor became Timmy's domain, a state-of-the-art educational center where children with long-term illnesses could continue their studies. He had designed the programs himself, incorporating both traditional academics and peer support groups. "Learning doesn't stop just because you're sick," Timmy told visitors, showing them around classrooms equipped with video conferencing systems for bedridden students. "Sometimes, understanding what's happening to you scientifically helps you fight it better." Edward's contribution manifested in the Business Resource Center on the third floor. Here, employers could learn how to support employees facing family medical crises without sacrificing business viability. The program offered practical solutions based on Malone Industries' successful policies. The center quickly became a model for similar facilities across the country. Medical schools sent students to study their integrated approach. Business schools analyzed their sustainable funding model. Social workers came to learn their family support techniques. Perhaps most significantly, the center bridged social divides. Wealthy executives sat beside diner waitresses in support groups, sharing the universal experience of family illness. Children from different backgrounds bonded in Timmy's education programs, illness erasing the boundaries of class and privilege. The Foundation Scholarship Program, named after Mrs. Henderson, specifically supported children from single-parent families and those affected by serious illness. The first recipient was Bradley Turner's younger sister, whose mother's cancer treatment had strained their family's resources. Regular community events brought together families who had received help, creating a network of mutual support. The diner hosted monthly dinners where new families could connect with those who had already completed their journey through medical crisis. "This isn't charity," Edward often said at these gatherings. "This is community. This is what family means, not just blood relations, but people coming together to support each other through life's hardest moments." The center's impact extended beyond its walls. Local businesses, inspired by their example, began implementing family-friendly policies. The hospital revised its procedures to include more comprehensive family support. Schools developed better programs for chronically ill students. Christmas Eve came again, snow falling softly outside the diner's windows. Inside, the annual family celebration was in full swing. But this year was special. It marked not just their survival, but their triumph. Claire stood at the counter, her hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded belly, their miracle baby, conceived after doctors said her cancer treatments might prevent pregnancy. Edward stood beside her, his arm around her waist, watching Timmy show his science project to the gathered crowd. 1 year ago, Edward addressed their assembled friends and family. "I stood outside this diner as a stranger. Today I stand here as a husband, a father, and a man who finally understands what real success means." The diner buzzed with familiar faces. Sarah and Joe arranged platters of food while Mrs. Henderson fussed over Timmy's tie. Dr. Bennett sat in his usual booth, discussing medical research with Timmy's science teacher. Even Bradley Turner and his mother had become part of their extended family. "We have an announcement," Claire said, squeezing Edward's hand. "The latest scans show we're having a girl, and we've decided to name her Hope, because that's what this year has taught us about." Timmy beamed with pride, already clutching a folder of research about being a big brother. "I've been studying genetic inheritance patterns," he announced, making everyone laugh. Some things hadn't changed. He was still their brilliant, curious boy. Edward pulled out a small, wrapped package, the deed to the diner. "Joe, Sarah," he said, presenting it to them. "Claire and I want you to be full partners. This place saved us all. It should belong to the people who kept it a home all these years." And the evening grew late, but no one wanted to leave. They were no longer just survivors of a shared crisis. They had become a true family, bound by choice rather than just circumstance. As midnight approached, they gathered around the counter where it all began. Timmy had insisted on recreating the moment he first met Edward, but with a different ending. "Hey, mister," he said, fighting back a grin. "My mom told me you used to be lost, but now you're found." Edward hugged his son close, tears in his eyes. "We all were lost," he replied, "until we found each other." Claire joined them, their unborn daughter already part of their circle. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the diner, warmth and love created their own kind of light. To family, Joe proposed a toast, raising his coffee cup. "Not just the one you're born with, but the one you build, the one you choose, the one you fight to keep." Everyone raised their cups, coffee for some, hot chocolate for others, as Christmas officially began. In that moment, surrounded by love and hope, they were no longer the broken pieces of the past, but a complete picture of what family could be. "Merry Christmas," Timmy said softly, looking around at his expanded family. "And this time nobody's leaving." The diner's bell chimed gently in the night breeze, a reminder of how their story began. But now it rang not with sadness or longing, but with the joy of homecoming, of healing, of hope realized. What did you think of this story of love, forgiveness, and second chances? Has anyone in your life taught you about the true meaning of family? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear how this story resonated with you and what moments touched your heart the most. If you want more heartwarming stories about family bonds, redemption, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We bring you meaningful stories that remind us of what truly matters in life. This story shows us that it's never too late to make things right, and that real family goes beyond blood ties. If this message touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope and healing are always possible. Every share helps spread a little more light and love in our world. Let this story be a reminder that sometimes the strongest families are the ones we choose to build together. What does family mean to you? Let us know in the comments.